Shinji and Warhammer40k, Chapter 21, An Inquiry into Values, Part 2. Ritsuko Akagi yawned as she gave her report. We've done another full diagnostic of the Magi, and like before, there's nothing out of the ordinary. The self-repair and self-defense systems are functioning perfectly. We even restored the core command data from a clean backup just to be sure.
Are you certain it no longer contains any malicious programming?
She nodded. As sure as I could ever be of the Magi.
She yawned again. First thing in the morning, he asks that. She only had 4 hours of sleep last night, making sure. Gendo was very insistent upon that. Why? She didn't care to know. She looked down intentionally, not meeting his gaze, as if she could feel it flowing down her body. Ritsuko knew she wasn't the height of beauty right then, her eyes dark and the weakness obvious in her posture. Though he might look it, Gendo found it distasteful for a man to force himself upon a woman. He preferred them to be all but hopeless and helpless in his arms, yet doing so of their own apparent free will. That was the whole point of seduction, after all. Akagi.
Despite hating herself for it, Ritsuko felt a certain thrill race through her. Gendo, for his part, also wanted to finish that with, at the usual place. However, it was unusual times they were living through. His affection in those dark moments were poisonous, yet very real. Sick sex as it might be, it would bring comfort to them both to just totally exhaust themselves physically and mentally, and shut out the world even for just a few hours. However, that was counterproductive. There was still so much work to be done.
You may go,
said Gendo. Ritsuko very quickly left the office. Once outside, she leaned against the wall and let out a deep breath. Disappointment was there in equal measure with sheer relief. She held only shame in seeking his attention while all the while hating the man for it. But slowly, bit by bit, she felt like she could finally impose the strength of her mind over her incredibly weak heart. She wondered if Maya was still back at the office. She chuckled darkly. Not good, Ritsuko. Going from one dependency to another. Maya was still there at the Magi Central Command Station, that large empty room with a single terminal in the centre. The open glass wall to one side showed whoever was inside the only direct link NERV has to the Magi. Everything, even up at the command centre, was upon a protected virtual system set up for its own security. Senpai! Greeted Maya as soon as Ritsuko entered. The scientist winced. The ray of the young woman's face just lights up whenever she approaches. Was that the feeling of power that Gendo gets from his dickery? Ritsuko just groaned. What are you still doing here, Maya? She asked. I would have assumed you would be visiting Shinji now that he's awake. Maya shrugged. You need me right now more than he does. She turned around to the screen and continued typing. Do I really? A part of her also resented having to rely on someone. Granted, the young woman probably meant something else entirely, since she did show all the signs of overwork. Again. On a more fundamental level, however, she had to admit that she needed the other just at least hanging around. Maya provided a moral centre, something long absent from her life. It was strange, having the bleakness lift after so long being with it that it phased away from her notice. Everything felt so keen, so full of uncertainty again, now that she had something to lose. Frightening, but not as frightening as being alone. It's been too long since she had someone she could just talk with. Besides, it's not like he won't have the others there. I don't need to compete for his attention. Maya's tone oozed annoyance. Ritsuko smirked a bit. She could understand that. Maya was 24 after all. The 10-year gap wouldn't seem so wide in a few more years, considering that statistically women lived longer than men, but asking after his health in the presence of teenage rivals would look unseemly. Maya, I just made my report to Commander Akari. While the Magi doesn't seem to have any more unforeseen programming, it is using 10% more resources than it should be. I didn't report that. Just what are you compiling in the Evangelion sim? What a coincidence! I was just about to finish and show it to you, Senpai. May I just say again first how I appreciate your trust in giving me unrestricted access with the virtual machine? She already had literal unrestricted access with the actual machine, but disguising her movements was far easier in the layered interface. Well, you really should. Ritsuko's smirk grew.
You're burning up $10 million of processing power per hour. Not that we have so many leasing our computing now, but the point is there. So, what do you have?
The Evangelion Battle Sim is something uniquely suited to taking the fullest advantage of the Magi's adaptive architecture.
She pointed to the screen as Ritsuko stood over her.
At first we made the Virtuava using the sync testing plugs. Good as the Magi is a computation, there's still so much it misses out of the Evangelion's operation. We now run the simulation from the Magi into the plugs, out to the individual Evangelions themselves, then back into the Magi. This gives a more accurate idea of what the Eva would do, like some kind of shared hallucination. The beauty is that once we have the interface ready, the software pretty much writes itself.
You're not telling me anything that I don't already know, but do go on.
Okay. There are 2 new additions to the simulation. The first is persistent damage. Instead of the sim battles happening as pre-programmed scenarios, we now have a succession of engagements with defined goals. Cooperative work with the UN forces is something we're eventually going to have to do anyway. The Avas in the city is now modelled more accurately. The second, well, I gave the Avas more enemies to fight.
Let me see. Ritsuko pulled open the data. She groaned. As if the point system wasn't enough. This isn't a game, Maya. It's supposed to feel as close to the real thing as possible.
That's rather hard to do, Senpai, when we don't exactly know what the real thing will be. The angels could arrive at any time, in any form.
But giant monsters from Evangelion Fantasy Battle? We might be stretching Rilling's suspension of disbelief here.
It is a variety of creatures with different attacks and weaknesses, though. Having the Ava beating up on each other or conventional military for too long. It gives a rather suspicious atmosphere, don't you think? The Ava's practicing against the powers of this earth instead of the enemy from on high.
Ritsuko sighed and agreed. The simulation had quickly grown into NERV's pet project. It helped fulfill makework for the long stretches of boredom between instances of blind panic that characterised their duties. The notion was that exposure beforehand to the factors of combat better prepared people for when the disaster really happens. Not even Gendo could stop the under-the-table betting going on. Even the pilots had to oblige. Once a week, a no-holds-barred super fight between them. It strengthened emotional attachments to the Evangelions and company loyalty, just like in sports, of how fans can impart themselves into the game. In NERV, that was almost literal. The potential loss or gain served as a reminder. The stakes are actually much greater. Simulations were all well and good, but when it was their turn, they had to do their very best. It was more than just a job. The prize was the survival of the human race. Where did you have time to make all this? Ritsuko had to ask. The map? The scoring system? The opponent data? I know this wasn't here 3 days ago.
Oh, that's easy. I didn't. I outsourced most of it.
Ritsuko groaned some more. She thought back to the book she had, inside of her desk drawers back at the office. In big, helpful yellow letters it advised, "Don't panic." It was always valid advice in NERV. She took a deep breath. I sincerely hope you didn't do something that's going to get you shot. Maya actually had the advantage that she was not a multifaceted genius. Ritsuko had to consider in every task whether or not she could do it faster and better than anyone she could foist it off to. They might get it wrong and have her end up with redoing everything from square one anyway.
It's all legal and secure according to accounting anyway. NERV Promotional Division just farms it out to artists and rendering stables. I just need simulation data, and the format for that's already been prepared out of having to slot in the Trident. The great thing about the Magi's own multipath biocomputing is that it can do recursive analog relationships. The more I run it through the simulation, the more realistic the opponent and the setting becomes after each time.
The Magi was never intended for games. Ritsuko groaned again. It was too early in the morning for this. I assume you're using the AT field engine, the angels, and assorted kaiju. That's cheating with the solidified AT field.
Well, it does help if we don't have to do the physics calculations when they move. All damage is assigned arbitrarily. Sorry.
Maya grinned impishly, then abruptly seemed so serious again.
Am I abusing the freedom you're giving me regarding the Magi?
Likely it was the recursive loop between the Magi's biocomputing circuitry, the Avas, back to the Magi and to the Evangelion's own brains again, that was slowly driving the strange amalgam of mechanical and biological thinking into self-awareness. After all, Principio Eternus was aware of itself, and all things that dared trespass into the stillness of its slumber. The Magi was not an enemy, a thing built to echo a human mind, yet lacking a soul. Because of that, so easy to take control, to turn its own might against itself. At the same time, it also strolled upon the brink of awareness and self-determination. Maya, and practically every computer scientist, was rightfully scared of anything that was hooked up to a weapon system just suddenly waking up and deciding it didn't have to obey anyone's orders.
No, sometimes it's better not to ask, Ritsuko chuckled. Some questions are better left unanswered, and others unasked. My life seems to have a shortage of pleasant surprises.
Lots of unpleasant ones, though. Sure, the girls were there when he was awake, but the doctors quickly made them leave. It was for his own good. No one of the medical staff dared answer any of his questions, and the pressure from both NERV and the JSSDF to make sure he recovered quickly and without worry. Thus he had nothing to do but wait. As the saying goes, some books to be read, others to be tasted, and a rare few to be chewed and digested. He was one of those people that devoured what he's read, and could call up line by line The Art of War and The Five Rings from his memory. Only when he got into Tokyo 3's more extensive libraries did he discover a copy of The Prince. Eloquence was merely practice, an aggregate of everything someone has already read, spoken or thought about. It was the illusion of a mental grab bag of ready sayings and pre-constructed arguments. At least, that was how young Ikari managed it. The most he could get out of the doctors was that he'd slept for nearly 4 weeks, and things had changed while he dreamt. He could very nearly feel it in the air. From his father to his fellow pirates, he prepared himself for the perils of conversation. He lacked the information necessary to craft a scenario. The first to visit him properly was Misato, accompanied by Kaji.
Hello, Shin-chan! How are you feeling?
She asked cheerily. Her face behind her smile was haggard. As the highest military officer of NERV, she had to deal with both accountability from NERV and the problems of what to do next. Kaji, as the buffer against all the screaming and posturing in the UN, looked worse.
I'm all right, he replied, smiling for her sake. Would you like to sit down?
Misato went one better and just flopped down near the foot of the bed. She let out a moan of relief and nearly went to sleep right there. She slowly turned to lie flat on her back, stretched out and staring numbly at the ceiling.
Did something happen? He asked, while inching up to a cross-legged seat under the covers. There was some slight pain. 3 weeks was enough for some muscle atrophy.
A lot of things happened,
she replied in a hollow tone.
But don't worry about it. It's our problem, not yours.
But Misato-san, when you worry, I worry. And when I worry, you worry. Then, well, you might as well just tell me. Kaji chuckled. I guess it won't do any harm. NERV just narrowly avoided being put under direct military control. The issue of incompetence in duty was raised, but shot down quickly, thanks to you. If NERV was really incompetent, then the Angel wouldn't have been defeated at all. Shinji winced. Misato glared at Kaji, who made a gesture of surrender.
Nothing that's happened is your fault, Shinji, she said.
I should have been faster.
And we should have prepared conventional defences better,
Misato replied dully.
Why did NERV really expect the Angels to be giant monsters? In the end, it doesn't really matter. What we're going to do now is what's important, instead of assigning blame.
What are we going to do?
What you're going to do is get some rest. I'm sure you're just itching to get out of here, but that won't happen if you strain yourself. It's been 3 weeks after all.
You're going to need your strength, Kaji added sadly. He still refused to meet his eyes. Misato had found him acceptable company recently, dutiful and not so pushy. Guilt was disguised as fatigue. Kaji knew Shinji Ikari's return would ignite the long-repressed emotions and reactions. Misato sat back up and looked around.
It's kind of bland around here, isn't it?
She grinned and reached over for the tote bag she'd brought. She shook it a bit.
Maybe seeing something familiar will help with your recovery?
One by one, she brought out and placed the figurines on the table near his bed, much to Shinji's wide-eyed gratitude. Are you sure it's just wise to leave them here? Kaji asked Misato. You did say they were kind of valuable, right, Shinji? On the other hand, better than gathering mould back at the apartment. How could something fall into such dismal chaos that fast? As if once the light of the boy's presence had gone, so quickly had demons of untidiness plunged recklessly into the breach. He wondered if that was how Shinji felt like in living there, chasing and picking up after Misato. The glorified housekeeper or the living avatar of ferocity, which was his real personality. Shinji remained unnaturally still, hard to read even with Kaji's spycraft. The moment their eyes briefly met, the man felt such terror as he'd never experienced before. He knows, he thought, giving no mind to how that was possible. The boy nodded, as if confirming. The adults didn't stay long. They still had so much to do, and of what they knew, much they couldn't say. Shinji wasn't going to force them to answer his questions. As such, there was nothing there for them but uncomfortable, regretful silence. Asuka arrived late in the afternoon, after school.
Hello, Shinji!
She greeted, going in with her usual vigour. Shinji found himself smiling just at the sight of her. The girl had a particularly triumphant grin.
So, the sleeping prince awakes.
It had been a particularly torturous 4 weeks while he slept. There was the sheer mind-numbing boredom and repetitiveness of her tasks. Asuka recognised full well that all her life was just preparation for her duties in Tokyo 3. Not until Shinji had she really been challenged in the areas that mattered most, and not until the city had she found any place that she could really call home. Small and simple as that apartment may have been, for the first time in her life she felt at peace. It wasn't the same place without Shinji. Seeing him unmoving like a corpse, day after day it wore down upon her psyche. Finally, he was awake, the measure of her existence, and behind that pale, confused face, she saw the gates to a whole new realm of personal potential. It was constantly harped onto her back at NERV, after all. Anything that Shinji could do, theoretically, she could accomplish as well. She held no illusions that Gendo's leeway and Ritsuko's attention was to groom her as his possible replacement. The emotional idiocy of adults. The greater good didn't seek replacements, but every facet to perform to the furthest. It was the only logical route. She dreaded the day he wouldn't be there, for his very existence seemed to be a moral lighthouse upon the twisted turmoil of her warrior ego's war against her leadership qualities. Asuka looked around the room. Surely the place was monitored several times over. She gave Shinji a look of frustration. There were so many things she wanted to ask.
I missed you, you know?
She said softly, admitting to friendship at least.
It's been like a month for us, and to you it's like yesterday. Man, that sucks. Once again you escaped the worst parts of the job.
She sat down beside him, along the right side of the bed, and leaned upon the table. She rested her chin upon her palm and grinned.
So, what have you got?
She asked. Huh? Asuka gestured out with her left hand.
Every time you set out, you come back with some new trick learned from the angel. So, what have you figured out this time, and can you teach it to me?
Shinji looked sheepish. I'm not sure that's really accurate.
Oh, please! It's that and your tendency to stab the enemy with their own body parts.
She poked at his forehead.
What does it take to be taken seriously around here? Do I need to maul somebody to death with my own amputated limb?
Then saying that, she winced in remembering Mana. Shinji caught that flash of sympathy and was unsure of how to react to that. In many ways, Asuka was his plan B, in all her flaws and strengths, as a signpost for humanity to rally around. All could only go so far. An army of yes-men were all but useless in the long run. He decided to get into the heart of the matter. How are you, Asuka? She turned away and put her attention to the figurines on the table. Asuka picked up the farseer.
I feel somewhat betrayed,
she said in a flat tone.
All that talk about teamwork and needing me, and what's the first thing you do? Cut me out of the loop!
It was his turn to wince. It wasn't like it seemed to be that important. We were doing just fine without it. She snorted.
Well, it's true that as a team we did need to know every little detail about each other. That's not a question of what socks you're wearing or what your favourite food is. Facts like that don't build a person.
Asuka turned back and said in a lower tone.
You don't trust me at all, do you? All you had to do was ask, you know.
Asuka?
See, Shinji, you lied to me. It wasn't just withholding information, blatantly, to my face. You told me about trust. Then you pulled that shit.
But I don't want to be dissected, he whispered. She snorted back, but in amusement this time.
Point.
Asuka picked up the Farseer figurine and held it up to the sunlight. Asuka was feeling guilty over hiding her own activities, but then Shinji let loose with his huge whopper of a secret, and she just had to react with, "What the hell? He just had to overshadow her even in that?" Her dalliances with Kaoru, even if she was starting to see just how convenient his presence was, simply paled into insignificance by comparison. "Seriously, Shinji, what the hell? You're making it really hard for me to feel like a hypocrite here."
"But I don't think I should forgive you that easily. I don't want that to happen to you either. You still could have let me help."
"In what way? I don't really understand much of anything about what's happening." Which was true. However, one didn't need to understand how a TV works to switch it on and change the channels. Shinji had calculated Asuka would most likely respond to emotional pressure. The girl didn't trust authority, and as such appearing to be in fear, giving the flaw in the invincible Shinji, would make her less inclined to abuse her own talents. Asuka had a look that was almost begging. He seemed reluctant, slumping into himself, as if ashamed of revealing his freakishness. However, he had already long decided to teach her pretty much everything. Taking a cue from the Emperor's mistakes, Shinji had quickly put priority to cutting off envy and avarice apart from his influence. If he had to use people as tools, then at least they shall be happy and willing in his service. Unfortunately, it warped the logic and morality of his devotees anyway, but at least not as bad as the alternative. Asuka turned away from the strange figure in her hands and really just looked at him there, bathed in the golden glow of sunlight. He still didn't look in any way impressive or epic. Girls are drawn to flash and good looks, she thought. Women are attracted to power. So shy, so frail looking, yet armies all over the world already feared even being under his notice. The greatest hurdle for Asuka was not that she still applied reason towards the rising tide of reality warping insanity plaguing the world, but that she still didn't know just where she was. Likely, Kaoru and Shinji weren't even so much romantic focus, but were representations of her own fears and hopes. She opened her mouth to say something, but broke off before letting out a syllable. "This is pathetic. Your wavering disgusts me. You desire his power, do you not? He lies helpless and unresisting before you. Just mount him already, and claim it all for yourself." Asuka stood there, frozen in a posture about to speechify, her mouth gaping open like a fish out of water. Shinji watched in confusion, as the moments passed and the shock on her face remained. After a while, Asuka closed her mouth and frowned.
"Did you say something?"
she asked him. At the negative, she turned to the thing she held in her right hand and scowled, then shook her head. "Nah, not possible." Asuka put the figurine aside and grimly faced him.
"No more running away," she said simply. "You need to learn to trust me. Stop being such a baka, Shinji. How else can we work together? Look at me," she wanted to shout. "That insult isn't easily forgiven."
"I'm sorry, Asuka," he sighed.
"Stop leaving me behind."
She'd already crawled onto the bed, her gaze intense.
"Do you really think I'd be that selfish, that concerned only with my own pride, that I'd feel threatened by whatever you or Ayanami are doing?"
Shinji groaned. It had only been a day since he woke up, and he'd hoped the big reveal would come at more controlled conditions. His body and his mind had yet to return to full capacity. Asuka had set aside all restraint at being listened to. It would foster a whole host of implications, but then again safer than the truth. She grinned fiercely. He blinked, and his expression opened into amazement. So she did know. She was choosing her words deliberately for the vaguest meanings. Asuka was doing her own part to protect him and his secrets. He really regretted not trusting her then. She could still surprise him. He'd caused her undeserved pain. "I'm sorry," he said again, and meant it.
"No more secrets. No more hiding. No more holding back. Show me just what it is you can really do. I want to learn all your tricks."
She bent closer so her whisper could be heard.
"Is it possible? Tell me the truth. Can humans control an AT field without an Ava?"
"So far, yes," he had to reply. "We just can't generate one."
"I won't take no for an answer, Shinji. You won't keep this from me."
Asuka licked her lips and tried to convey the depths of her determination.
"I will hate you forever if you try to keep me as just a doll to act out as you want. This power will be mine. I'll be the strongest I can possibly be."
"Has anyone said to you that you're very beautiful, Asuka?" Asuka paused and blinked down at him. He seemed intensely afraid for some reason. She belatedly recognised their position. She'd pushed him down to his back and her face hovered just inches above him. To an outside observer it would seem as she, was forcing herself upon him. She blushed terribly.
Yes,
she had to say, her face defiant. She refused to be embarrassed. Asuka had decided. It all made for a convenient excuse. They were pilots of the Ava, but they were still teenagers, and people expected them to act like teenagers. It was the first time, though, that he'd ever really acknowledged her femininity. Shinji quirked his lips, but still remained wary. But the beauty of the face is really dependent upon the structure of the bone beneath. I wonder, has anyone ever told you that you have a beautiful skull, Asuka? It seems more accurate that way.
Creepy, Fairchild. Creepy.
The girl sat back and crossed her arms over her chest.
Just what is that supposed to mean?
Shinji sighed. Please be careful, Asuka. There are always consequences. Make sure you're really ready for what you ask. She laughed.
Maybe, maybe not. How else am I supposed to know?
She kicked lightly at his side and smoothed back down the folds of her skirt.
Fine. I suppose I should let you rest up. But once you're back on your feet, promise me.
Shinji let out a strangled groan. Even if it made for convenient cover, it would cause a whole lot of confusion and uncomfortable situations. Asuka looked satisfied. She also enjoyed seeing him writhe about in areas where he had no aptitude. Go away, Asuka, he commanded softly. Everyone from Masato down to Kensuke, and because Maya and Rei would understand what was going on, they would surely be the most merciless in their teasing, even if jealousy was something you didn't need to fear. Unsurprisingly, almost everyone who had an inkling of his true abilities enjoyed seeing him suffer in mortal failings. It felt like family. Asuka grinned. It was so easy to feel protective of Shinji, even if she realised that he was trying to protect her own self-image that way. False weakness irritated her greatly, as like in a different time she would have loathed Shinji's spinelessness and fear of his own potential. At least at the moment the Shinji that she knew had an excuse. It was still fear, but for others instead of himself. At least she knew he indeed cared.
Yeah. It's not like we can do anything useful in this place.
As soon as Asuka was gone, Shinji turned to the figurine and shouted mentally, "What the hell was that?" "Why do you resist?" replied the Farseer, her voice so calm. "The facade is useful, but it would surely tie them even more to you. This is the dream of many you are living. Do you not love them? You already deem it a matter of course that you may and should give your lives for theirs, if necessary." "I resist, because it would make everything so absurdly complicated even beyond my capacity to predict. And I don't really know. Is this love? I don't know. As much as I'd like to forge a permanent bond. If it will only hurt them more in the long run. This is war. Do we really have time for that?" Simply because it was so ridiculously easy that he had to fight the temptation. Much like his father, Shinji placed great value upon his own self-control. After all, to truly master others, one must first be the master of oneself. "Oh, you are still so very, very young, my young king." Less than 15 minutes later, Rei arrived. "Hello, Pilot Akari," she said, her face as usual devoid of unnecessary emotion. "Hello, Rei." Minutes passed as both waited for the other to speak what each believed needed to be said. In the end, Rei broke the silence first. She tilted her head to the side and seemed puzzled. "I must confess that I have the strange urge to lick all of..." Shinji groaned and pulled his pillow out from behind his head. He buried his face in it and pointed with it right towards the door. "Rei, please go prevent any more females that aren't medical staff from entering this room." She seemed disappointed, but complied. "Hello, Commissar Kirishima," said Rei. "You may not enter. It is his will." The girl seemed incredibly miffed. All her pleasant daydreams just got derailed, just when she'd worked up the daring to act upon them. Masato jumped casually on the way back to NERV. A lot of people all over the city felt happy and celebratory for some reason. "Stop it!" Shinji begged some more, nearly whimpering. "You know I have no control over this. Stop it yourself. Now you are awake and the possibilities are just writhing in ecstasy." The Farseer's tone dripped sarcasm. She was still annoyed at being repressed. Sneeze wrongly and you might crack this planet in half.
You may indulge your perverted urges later, witch. 1 month have we spent in silent ignorance while the world changed around us. We must move even more quickly now. You must free your mind from distractions, Commander, and order your body to hurry in its healing.
The world had changed, and the boy himself as well. What is seen cannot be unseen, and the line once crossed could not be uncrossed. He could no longer hide in his fear and ignorance disguised as innocence.
There is a certain flavour in the air. Turmoil awaits. We must see if we can turn this chaos into our ultimate benefit.
The Chaos Marine chuckled. Slowly, but ever unstoppable, the boy's unfolding truth was something that he, even as just a facet of imagination, longed to see. No, I'd rather that no one should suffer any more just to add to my power.
You are indeed powerful, Bright Lord, but not even you are powerful enough to take that choice away from them.
The cycle, once started, could only turn into a cyclone. Makoto Hyuga knew he was in trouble. He woke up and found that apparently stuff had happened, and that he was there, and he apparently knew nothing about it. In watching the video, he too could hardly believe those words were coming out of his mouth. That right there took bravery and eloquence he didn't even know he had. It had been 4 days after that, and the insanity didn't seem to show any signs of dying down. People, even co-workers, were hanging on to his simplest words or simply avoiding him. Thankfully, Maya seemed immune, relaxed and friendly as ever. Then again, hanging around Shinji probably had her used to that sort of thing. Shigeru had a whole host of deadpan snarkiness that just had to be unleashed, milking the priestly references. Unfortunately, poor Makoto couldn't even put his newfound popularity to any good use, since the women that approached him seemed unable to look at him in any romantic light, even worse than when he was just a nerdy one in the group. Even Kodama Haraki, whom he just started to get comfortable with, now seemed to take a bit of a distance. She seemed oddly shy, all of a sudden. That wasn't the end of his troubles, though. Aside from the many annoyances in his life, all the unwanted conversation, there was one actual inescapable dialogue he dreaded. That it didn't happen the day right afterwards only made it worse, and with every day that passed, that fear increased. How does one, after all, prepare for a scolding by Gendo Akari? When he was finally called up to the NERV commander's office, the lieutenant was justifiably relieved. He stood there, fidgeting and in silence. Gendo still had yet to speak. He could have had the discussion 3 days earlier, but to Gendo that would seem to give his tacit acknowledgement to the importance of the event or the person. What irked him most was the knowledge that Makoto had no link to SEAL, the JSSDF, or any other acronym organisation at all, NERV being the obvious exception. It was the first time he'd seen the office. He was used to NERV wasting space on spooky ambience, but is Gendo Akari really that important? He thought.
Lieutenant Hyuga, regardless of the effects of your actions, you still disobeyed direct orders from NERV.
Gendo enunciated clearly, dragging out each sentence.
We are an organisation devoted to the defeat of angels. We do not maintain peace. We do not control this city. You have vastly overstepped your own authority and may have set an unwise precedent.
Each, though, was a blatant lie. It all had the tone of crushing truth. In the end, as Gendo had realised very early on, it was all just that easy. Makoto bowed deeply. I'm very sorry, sir.
Were you made to do this, or was it out of your own volition?
He kept his face pointed to the ground. I can honestly say I wasn't really sure of what I was thinking at the time. Once again, my apologies, sir.
So then you must bear the penalties all by yourself.
Yes, sir.
You must understand that regardless of how it turned out, the possibility of the event turning for the worse was likewise extremely high. NERV's position was clear and valid. Good intentions that erode official authority will not help in the time of crisis.
I understand, sir. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of my actions. He knew that instead of a hero for the weeping people, he could just as easily have been torn apart by the mob.
Very well. Rules must be maintained or the foundations of order begin to collapse. 1 week's pay shall be deducted from your salary. You will cease all references to Shinji Ikari. He does not dictate NERV policy. You have overstepped your bounds and his by your words.
Sir? A moment stretched by. Nothing I said was particularly untrue, immoral, or subversive. Gendo narrowed his gaze. Makoto was still in a submissive stance, but there was slight defiance in that tone. The content is immaterial. As an officer of NERV, it is not for you to derail the chain of command. Such foolish notions will not be tolerated out of the employees of NERV.
Pardon me, sir, but I don't think you're actually allowed to penalise me according to my own personal beliefs.
Makoto looked up, and his eyeglasses glinted.
NERV may field the Evangelions, but it's the pilots who are directly responsible for humanity's continued well-being. They may not set policy, but when what we do directly interferes upon their ability to fight, then it's us who seem superfluous.
When you say they, you mean he.
Gendo pushed his eyeglasses up, the glint hiding his eyes. He'd actually shown some surprise, as after all that was something he did so often that being subjected to the spectacle managed to unnerve him.
This is subversive of the effective chain of command. You're starting to show yourself as unfit for your responsibilities.
The test of that is upon duty itself, sir, Makoto replied evenly. He stood straight but unchallenging. I have always and will serve NERV's own duty to the best of my ability.
There was a buzzing sound. The door to the office slid open.
Ikari, you wanted the synchro reports immediately, so excuse the
Fuyutsuki looked up to see two pairs of eerily reflective glasses staring down at him. He coughed.
I'll come back later.
No need. Lieutenant Hyuga, you're dismissed. Consider yourself docked 1 month's pay. If I hear about any proselytizing, be assured I will take appropriate measures.
Makoto bowed deeply. Understood, sir.
He left.
The old man looked amused as the lieutenant passed him by. He moved to the table and laid down the stack of folders. You're going to have to stop overthinking things, he said to Gendo. What's a little leeway this far into the game? You could lose sight of what's important if you try and railroad everyone and everything into compliance.
You know as well as I do that a moment of laxity is all it takes.
Gendo picked up a folder and began to casually scan through.
He is perhaps unfit for duty. The signs of a mental disorder. Frustration. Passive aggression.
Isn't that what you had planned for the boy?
The NERV commander snapped the folder shut. This is accurate?
Unfortunately, yes, the older man sighed. Shinji Ikari barely managed to break the 50 sync ratio. It's enough to get the Eva moving, but not much else.
The boy has always had a ridiculously low sync ratio with the test plugs.
This is with the Evangelion. Shinji had never failed to score below 60 in an Eva, though it still fluctuated wildly. Of course, it has been a month in a coma. We don't know if there's really some lingering trauma from combat.
No. The boy is becoming less useful.
Gendo frowned mightily.
I find it hard to admit, but the boy thrives under mortal combat. He lacks fear.
And you wanted him fearful? Fuyutsuki tapped at the glass plate on the table. So fearful that you can't help but feel it, to emerge and quell that helpless terror. You know, she might even approve of her son.
Might. Maybe. Uncertainty. It's useless for us to contemplate them.
There's so much hanging upon the boy. You know, if it was me, I'd care a little more. You spend so much time controlling the environment around the boy, and yet... Ikari, a lot more could be accomplished just by sitting down and being his father.
Do not lecture me, Sensei. You are not the boy's father.
No matter how much you might wish that, you had made her choice.
Therefore, you will not act in any way that presumes upon that role.
The older man sighed again. Fine, I'll heed your warning, Ikari. He looked away. You should know. You're not the only one who seeks to use the boy as a tool. What if he decides he could be happier somewhere?
Then he will have his happiness while the world dies. Such a simple question.
NERV isn't the only player in the game, Ikari. We might be the biggest, but there are others who want their moments in the sun. I could just hear them salivating for the chance to convince him to leave NERV. Fuyutsuki pulled out an orange folder from the pile and opened it up. Here's a formal summons from the UN for NERV to submit themselves to a public inquiry.
We already did this.
Gendo steepled his fingers under his chin.
I see we're being assured we're not under any legal pressure, just a fact-finding interview. Fools. They want blood and are willing to resort to any measure.
It's a publicity stunt. They want to puff themselves up at our expense.
So to them the boy represents NERV. So be it. Send him. Fuyutsuki restrained his curse.
What? They'll eat him alive, Ikari.
This world wants to eat illusions. Let them have it. The boy is just a boy. It's time to see if they will wake up to it or not. This is what they want. Let them have it.
He unclasped his fingers and took up the report again.
We can spare one pilot to attend in my place, especially with these results.
I have a bad feeling about this, Ikari.
You wanted leeway? I give you leeway.
Gendo turned to behold the geofront. Every motion, every word he made, it was all so pre-calculated and ominous. Swing! Even to the sound of deeming further conversation meaningless. Did you actually say swing as you turned your chair around? Gendo merely entered into a profound silence. Shinji didn't know how to swim. He was able to float face down, but then again, so could a corpse. A month was enough for muscle atrophy, and Ritsuko decided that in keeping with his therapy, he may as well learn. NERV did have a large pool after all. He relaxed nearby, reading a book. He was waiting for the girls to finish their synchro testing. They alternated in teaching. The pilot decided that the decision was all Dr. Kage. His father would have seen that prolonged contact with nubile examples of the opposite sex in only swimsuits could hardly bring his mental condition towards a useful equilibrium. Then again, the good, morally flexible, doctor wasn't out to deliberately make his life hell. He wondered if he was starting to see a conflicting trend towards pilot-raising project methods. If a mentally unbalanced person could more easily mesh with the Ava's feral mind, or if someone content and healthy could impose their own will upon it. He turned a page. More likely Maya's influence. He wondered when she'd show up in a two-piece, just to show off to the teenage pilots. He grinned a bit. Yes, the threads of fate was showing that the most likely plan. Incidentally, the book he was reading was the reference used by Kozo Fuyutsuki when he was still a professor of metaphysics. It wasn't the one his mother owned, as that was burned by Gendo, but the words were the same as she had read so long ago. Amazingly, within its pages he could already see the roots of AT field theory. Back in 1973, Dr. Tannhauser published a paper called Macro Reflections in Adaptive Scale that jump-started both psychomotive research and the N2 weapon. The discovery of the geofront and Lilith motivated further inwards exploration instead of the macro-shifted materials codenamed Gunbuster. Its immense strength was out of its ability to pump energy into subspace instead of loosening atomic connections. Essentially, as all matter is energy, quantum-aware materials could be immensely strong, but apparently linked to the conceptual identity of someone in control. The warp field would provide inertia, FTL, and defense. The fact that he had discovered a way to harness willpower drove the 9-time Nobel Prize winner to drinking, as he was an avowed atheist, and the idea that things could be willed into happening seemed like such an open cheat, a hostile act against the rational universe. Without Lilith, he would have eventually returned to science and minimised the reality-busting implications of his discoveries. He would have been among those who reverse-engineered the FTL of the Nautilus fished out of the Pacific. With Lilith, however, he had an example of, if not first, then an old race. Humanity was nothing more than an unintentional happenstance. The first sentient races had to be composed of mostly energy, born right outside of the Big Bang. Only gradually would have what is known as life emerged in physical form. Dr. Immanuel Tannhauser provided experimental proof that humanity existed not just in the material, but that life expressed itself simultaneously in either subspace and hyperspace, or collectively, what he called the immaterium states. By manipulating the immaterial, the material may be changed. Russian psychics had simple tricks like telepathy and telekinesis. What was termed the secret of blue water, being that essentially one had to accept the idea of an ether field regardless of function, would have brought out inertial cancelling, subspace travel, super strong materials, and super efficient, or more like ungodly cheap, sublight drives. The mystery of Lilith gave him nightmares. It was no secret that he was the first to shorten ether field into AT field. While everyone referred to it as absolute territory, he never failed to call it the absolute terror. The power to destroy a galaxy was insignificant compared to the all-consuming force that simply threatened to burst free. Life, the universe, everything, it was too much. According to the book, Dr. Tannhauser didn't just kill himself.
He wasted his personal fortune into building a device that would scramble his own warp pattern existence beyond any attempt at retrieval, even by, say, beings that can rewrite reality, effectively destroying what would later be considered his soul, though it was entirely separate from all religious preconceptions. They found his body in an advanced state of decay, even when people had just talked to him but 5 hours before. He willed his remains to be cremated and scattered over the ocean. Gunbuster, huh? Said Shinji. Super strong material. Should be difficult to produce. They'd probably make it into a giant robot anyway. There was a lot of math that he simply didn't understand. The book was written after Tannhauser's death and focused more upon the idea of conceptual identity. It was surprising that the word homing laser was actually used at all in the text. One of the reasons he loved books so much was that now and then it would strike him like a lead pipe how truth was often far stranger than fiction. The Evangelion brought nothing but pain, even before it ever really existed. He wondered if humanity as a whole was therefore lucky or unlucky in knowing the truth of reality. The pool, deep within NERV, open to all, was surprisingly secure. There was one security camera, but that was set to record. No one actually watched the pilots as they moved around inside NERV. They were supposed to be safe and were trusted to behave themselves. Shinji had always had a tendency to evade notice. He discovered that he could also project a slight aversion radius, making those approaching the pool decide on going somewhere else entirely, like some sort of someone else's problem field.
So what's up with you?
Asuka asked, floating face up and demonstrating just how easy it was. Slow sweeps with her palm was sufficient to move her body.
That was just disappointing,
she said, referring to their latest simulation training.
You just stood there and let us wail away at you. Was that intentional?
Shinji was still seated on the folding chair, entirely unwilling to get into the water. He looked up briefly, then back to the book. Asuka was certainly a distracting sight, and she knew it. He turned the page. Sorry to say, but no. The human body just isn't meant to handle an AT field. Put me into a month-long coma. It seems to interfere directly with our synchronization with the Ava. He shut the book. Are you sure you still want to try this out? Asuka pulled herself out of the water and caught the towel Shinji had tossed over. She dried her hair and sat down beside him, still dripping. He twitched. Yes, very distracting. She was exulting in his finally acknowledging her existence as a female of the species. Deliberately being clingy served both to hide their conversations and discomfort him. There was also honest seduction going on here, but Asuka was still, after all, a teenager, and it was, at best, awkward for the both of them. It was ever so much more easier to adhere to the student-teacher relationship.
I'm certain,
said Asuka, taking the book from him. She skimmed through it.
I've read this before. Doesn't it say humans already possess an AT field?
Our own absolute territory defines us as being, well, ourselves. May I touch you? He put his palm flat on her shoulder. At a subatomic level, there's no difference between us. Your atoms, your molecules are fundamentally the same as mine. Yet our identity remains distinct, even should we completely exchange our particles.
By that token, rocks would have AT fields. That's just macro-scale stability.
Well, the human AD field doesn't really exist in physical reality, but in the mind. Unlike our physical selves, the mind's always changing. Neurons fire, memories are made and forgotten. There's so much going on that it's a miracle we even remember who we are when we wake up every morning. Asuka nodded.
The soul's the conceptual identity of a person. Not just the mind, but how the mind perceives itself. I don't understand how a soul could leak, though.
It was one of the things that reminded her of her mother's accident.
How can we extend this absolute territory? Or how do angels even do it?
Well, for starters, how do we find proof of metaphysical reality?
The Russians and their telepaths. Precognition goes completely against all the laws of physics, unless we grant that quantum-scale events can operate and be perceived in macro-scale reality.
The mind's not bound within grey matter or existing in packets of neural activity. The mind is awareness. It's a cloud around us, boundaried by our perceptions. The main problem with this is that the greater someone extends their absolute territory, so does it weaken their identity. The subjects all went insane because their minds were doing something minds were never meant to do.
So you're saying the human AT field is supposed to keep thoughts in instead of sending it out?
He shrugged. Our flesh is a prison, our mind is a cage. Asuka sniffed again.
But that doesn't explain explain how you can do what you can do, and I still have yet to prove it's possible for me to accomplish the same thing. You'll say you're not a freak just because of that.
He shrugged. Ray can do it. Although even I can't say that she's completely sane. The mere fact that she's not a gibbering, self-mutilating wreck each time she uses her AT field says a lot. For instance, we use the AT field of the Ava. It generates the field, we manipulate it. And our brains haven't exploded yet. He sat up and crossed his legs, holding a hand up like in Buddha statues. Manipulating it isn't the problem. Generating it is. Taking it from within to without. He made a circular gesture.
That sucks. I don't want to destroy my sync ratio or fall into a coma, but I want to feel it just once. It's not fair that you get to have all these superpowers.
Shinji chuckled. You're just the type to make a mask and go out to fight crime if you had one, wouldn't you?
Wonderfraulein.
She tilted her head to the side.
Or Miracle Girl.
She grew serious again.
You're stalling. What do I really have to do for you to teach me?
He sighed. Why, Asuka? Is that really all there is? Curiosity?
Isn't that enough?
Even just the knowledge that you can do special tricks can bring about its own strange euphoria. It might not even be harmful at a low level, but it may drive you to foolish actions. Asuka, these are just tricks. You don't need them to be strong and unique and appreciated.
Look, if you can't even do it anymore, just tell me.
She put her face uncomfortably close.
I'm getting suspicious. Either you're being selfish about this, or you just want me to continue thinking you're all that when you're not.
Reverse psychology, Asuka? Shinji sighed again. Fine, if it'll make you happy. He put his hands on his shoulders. Close your eyes. Asuka did so, blushing faintly. His stare, his posture, it was like he wanted to kiss her. He gulped nervously. The part of him that was just a teenage boy was in panic. So very many things could go wrong. The world was changing, he was changing, and there were so many things he had to figure out. The notion that Asuka might possibly believe she had to offer her body in exchange for his knowledge and respect was detestable to him. He much preferred standing among equals, or at least a close level. The main issue is trust, he began. We trust the universe to behave according to its own impersonal laws, for up to remain up, down to remain down. The problem with the AT field is that it's not something we humans are even designed to perceive. He took his hands off her shoulders and took her hand. Asuka got up, still keeping her eyes closed. It's not mind over matter. It's not even mind is matter. The AT field's just breaking the rules. Right now you're trying to feel your way in the dark, aren't you? How do you feel?
How I feel? How should I feel?
She pouted slightly.
Which meaning of the word are you using?
Are you afraid? Cold? All that? She shook her head.
I'm okay. I'm not really getting anything new.
She was hoping for that sensation when she used the Ava's AT field.
What should I do now?
They were slowly walking around. Asuka tried vainly to remember the layout around the pool, putting her steps according to what she remembered. It was like trying to draw a map inside her own mind, and eventually she just gave that up. Distance and speed were measurements she couldn't make out of just blind guesswork. His voice was her beacon. Shinji just looked so unimposing that it was hard for her to appreciate his strength. He didn't make any effort to stop appearing so weak. He shrank away from competition. And the dark, though, in his voice. It was easier to believe. It was also just easy to trust him. She knew he'd never lead her astray, literally and figuratively. He just didn't seem like that sort of person. He completely lacked the bad boy edge. Open your eyes, Asuka. She did so, and yelped as she saw her situation. She made a grab for his arm and watched wide-eyed.
We're walking on water? How is this possible?
Angels can fly, Asuka. Why should this be such a surprise? Asuka dipped her toe into the water and splashed around a bit. It was definitely still liquid. However, as soon as she put her soles parallel to the surface, it felt solid. It was amazing. She lacked words to express her disbelief.
Holy shit!
Shinji groaned. Please don't. Asuka began to laugh. She let go of his hand and warily stood on her own 2 feet. She took one step, then another. It was impossible. It was incredible. Shinji smiled at the clear childish delight on her face. Asuka slunk down, preparing to run. She took one step and sank like a rock. She gasped and thrashed around until Shinji walked over and pulled her back up. She coughed out water as she sat, again on the water surface.
Why did it stop?
She asked after a while. Dimly, she remembered a similar passage in biblical structure. It's not surface tension, Asuka. It's not anti-gravity. It's not that the water itself is hardening. It's not even that you're generating the field. Shinji crouched down beside her. The mind only has itself as its own measure. When you shifted perception to what you wanted, which you expected to happen, it all fell apart because your own mind recognised the irrationality of your desires. You became unable to use the AT field when you remembered the motives of your own flesh. Asuka, testing a notion, tried to let go of her grip on his hand. Slowly she began to sink. She closed her eyes and thought,
He won't let me sink. As long as I hold on, I can do this.
The water seemed to support her weight again.
So you're generating the AT field that makes this possible? Are we pushing against the water?
If that was the case, it still wouldn't allow us to walk. It is liquid after all. There wasn't even a ripple. They were at most half a centimetre below the surface. Forget buoyancy. Once you have the AT field, you don't need to pray or to believe. It just is. That's why I find it frightening.
That sounds close to a no-limits fallacy right there.
Shinji frowned. He could do things out of the 2-kilometre sphere of passive AT field that Ray emitted around the city. That event during the attack. He somehow managed to emit his own AT field, despite lacking the specialised organs needed. It was ultimately self-harming, but he was able to perceive the barriers in their totality, dissolve them and recreate them. All matter was the end patterns of energy. Either that, or he'd powered the act with the fading light of the souls of the dying. He'd felt them after all. The notion that he could take in, to eat, souls to fuel his abilities didn't appeal to him on any level. He hoped it was the former, better to be a freak of chance than the alternative. Science had proven the existence of soul, yet at the same time fails to explain what it really is. He stood up and began to walk towards the dry floor. Asuka followed, and trying to keep her mind completely clear of all thoughts. Once there, Shinji bade her face the pool and moved behind her. He put his hands over her wrists and began to move her arms about. Asuka was blushing heavily. The most she'd ever gone with Kaoru was a kiss, but here was Shinji being even more intimate. There was, however, a clinical distance, even when their bodies were pressed together, which discomforted her more than the embarrassment. Together they moved their palms out. There's the push. A slow wave broke through the pool surface. And the pull. They brought their hands in and a wall of water rose towards them. Keeping their minds clear of all thoughts and all doubt, they lifted their arms and the water rose as like a pillar. Shinji took her right arm and made a slapping gesture towards it. The water column broke apart, as if slashed. And the edge of the AT field. Now what causes these, Asuka?
The particle property of the AT field,
she responded, out of her conversations with Ritsuko.
So the field can affect mass. Of course, we already know that since we can use it as a shield, but... Holy...
Please stop. Asuka coughed.
Wait, Shinji, there aren't any words to mark this level of insanity that don't involve divinity or fucking in any context.
She looked aside and smiled impishly.
Alright. I feel cold.
She wiggled her fingers, watching the ripples grow. Strangely enough, the way to her own power was to separate herself from that very potential.
It's not really tiring, but I feel diminished somehow.
The AT field's called the light of the soul, and I'm afraid it's this that will burn away at your ability to pilot the Ava. He breathed into her ear. Please understand, Asuka. I want to turn this off. It's not right.
Shinji, for countless years, humanity dreamed of controlling the environment directly, commanding the weather, protecting from danger, flying. Shinji, we can do this now. Why don't you want this to spread? I know some people would risk death just to have this feeling.
Asuka sighed. Wasn't it just so basic?
I can feel it. Because it's self-harming, I don't think we have to fear abuse.
I think our own limitations are what separate us from the angels. If we didn't grow tired from working, do you suppose we wouldn't have trained pack animals or made the first machines? If we could so easily fly, then the dreamers and inventors would never have flown to their own reaches of mental genius.
That was then. This is now. I don't think you actually have the right to keep this from the world.
Asuka, I haven't even figured out how to teach you and you want me to instruct the world? He boggled at her anger.
This It's indescribable. I don't get you. How can you even call yourself a man if you don't feel just how empowering this is? It's the fulfillment of every wish every child and every human mind wanted. It's not fair. The angels can do it so easily. Are we humans just cursed? Just that inferior?
They are, well, huge. And we are killing them.
All our science, all our machinery.
Asuka clenched her fist, sending a spray of water over them.
It feels so pretentious. Ultimately, it's not us that flies, but what we make. It's not us that kills, but the tools we use to make up for our weakness. We're still so small. This power should be ours, Shinji.
That's where we're going to have to disagree, Asuka. To me, it's the angels that end up writing themselves into an evolutionary dead end. All this innate power, and they lack the ability to truly create.
Damn it! I wanted to feel it. I have it now. But now it just makes me feel even weaker than before. Damn them. Damn the angels.
She brought briefly to Ayanami Ray, who could use his power without limit. An old hate stirred. It quieted again, as she remembered. Ray had said she was sterile. Asuka remembered genetics, like a mule, unable to create more of its own kind. She grit her teeth. Power, all power, had its price. Asuka was not willing to abandon her humanity just for mere tricks. She still needed to be the pilot for the Evangelion.
The particle property, she said slowly. But what about the wave property of the AT field? Can we manipulate raw energy?
To be frank, yes and no. We can't do the impressive feats the Ava can do, like messing with the entire electromagnetic spectrum, generating energy beams and stuff like that. There's something else though. Something that humans have already been able to do without external aid. Asuka turned to face him, frowning.
You're talking about the psychics.
Shinji scratched at the side of his cheek, smiling weakly. I find it hard to describe. The most natural of the unnatural abilities? Technically, the Russians did find a way to train people into it, but instead of killing yourself, you just end up stark raving mad. Even if we figure out a way to buffer the effects, all of this, telepathy, telekinesis, precognition, they're all just tricks. They're crutches. I'd rather have you develop something more useful. She would have liked being able to perform what could be termed as magic.
What could be more useful than that? Okay, I'm getting that overt use of the AT field is bad for us humans. Leave that to the Ava. But now that I know we can, isn't it feasible to just find a safe limit? This is too much to just ignore.
Would you rather read minds or have a mind that simply can't be manipulated from the outside? Would you rather move things with your mind or be able to disrupt that from ever happening to or around you? Shinji put a finger to her forehead and rubbed at it in a spiralling motion. Her flesh tingled, her nerves fired up with anticipation. Would you rather see the future or embrace unpredictability totally and be immune to scrying? Asuka blinked. The first choices were all more appealing, but the alternatives were to her more practical. She knew telepathy has its caveat in simply hearing too much. Telekinesis didn't obsolete just walking over and picking something up, and for the most part, as research showed, that actually required much less effort. Precognition was self-defeating. Either it was too vague or too precise. In either case, it had to be changed, and that only brought on headaches as the possibilities realigned. The redhead pilot looked at the choices, and realised that she could either be a follower or a leader. The powers offered would only lock her into being used as a tool. She could become dependent upon them. The natural protection from such things should be simpler, easier to maintain, and wouldn't negatively impact upon her lifestyle. There was change just for change's sake, and there was true growth. Asuka nodded. Reason was power in itself. The greater good demanded a long-term solution. She had to thank Kaoru for that, actually. In any other time, she could have been jealous and grabbed at all power offered to her, locking herself into a self-destructive spiral. Asuka recognised her own ego, but her ambition and her drive towards greatness was tempered with the knowing it was lonely at the top. She could cherish even her hate, and while she still put herself on a pedestal, could climb back up. Asuka was stubborn, in ways that would have just amazed herself a few months before.
Show me, she said. Prove to me this is really the way into glory.
Shinji smiled slightly. I'm not going to force you into anything if you don't want to.
Seriously, I realise now. Even if I have full control of an AT field, even if I could generate one without any problems. What am I supposed to do? Go hand to hand against an angel? You're right. I am already powerful, and that power's called the Evangelion.
Shinji stepped back onto the pool's cold edge and sat down. Asuka joined him, kicking her toes under the water. The universe and its laws were once more obeyed without question. He winced, rubbing his shoulders. The Evangelion is changing us, Asuka. Taking in LCL, fighting angels, uniting our wills with those monsters. It's inconceivable that we won't be affected by those things.
When did you figure out you can use an AT field without an Ava?
Shinji still had to measure his secrets. Too much all at once would just overwhelm Asuka. It was imperative they continue to act as normal. It'd take too long to explain. Would it be enough to say that Rei helped me? She doesn't like me being so fragile. Knowing that Rei wasn't exactly human made things go in Asuka's mind. Instead of despising the other girl, such a massive flaw ironically made the other pilot seem more human. She despised dolls, true, but less on the mere existence of such toys, but more of people who chose to be dolls, to be used and abused by others and be happy in it. Rei's background went so far beyond that, without even the slightest implication of choice in being what she was, that derision crossed over into pity. Normal people would be insulted by blatant patronising, but to Rei, whose contact with Gendo was quite upon that level alone, it disturbed Asuka to feel the appreciation given by the other girl. Or Rei was still messing with her mind. Given her mentors, it wasn't unlikely. By being alike sisters in sharing a secret, professional antagonism between them vanished. The enemy was, well, the man. They were united in that struggle.
You like her, don't you?
Asuka asked, her voice soft. She'd seen others act as if saying, please love me, please don't turn me away. The essential human condition. Rei was not human, in that she didn't care for herself and seemed to live just to give. It was sickening. It was pathetic. It frightened Asuka that she wanted it too. Rei, how could I say? She's the type that never gives up on a promise, you know? When she says she'll stand by me until the end of time, she means it. To be the subject of such devotion is humbling. Shinji was looking away. Had his eyes met Asuka's searching look back then, it would have seemed as if asking, are you strong enough to show me the same dedication? A true human such as you, can you be beaten so easily? As proved when she was walking around blind, when the measure is only oneself, it was very easy to get lost. Asuka also searched for order, for defined limits. The idea of the greater good appealed to her in that it designed both her superiors and inferiors. As a passive-aggressive person, she also needed the touch of discipline. Shinji felt a headache rising. Asuka had to grow on her own. It'd be all too easy to manipulate her emotions and her ideals for his purposes, but he didn't need an intellectual sadomasochist in his hands. Asuka was so stubborn that she'd break before she'd bend to someone's will. Just ordering Asuka into doing something would backfire so badly it just might be funny.
What can I do?
Asked Asuka. Such a loaded question. It was odd to see her so meek and servile, but within that still burned her need to shine. It'd be better to just try things out with the Evangelion. Not only are the effects easier to control, there's only the time limit to what we can do. There's one thing that we can try that shouldn't affect us too badly. Asuka perked up.
And what's that?
Sense intruding AT fields. He grinned. You know how some people seem to have a sixth sense, able to guess where someone else is or how they're feeling? Twins seem to do this a lot.
So you can read someone's mind?
Shinji groaned again. Why do people keep assuming that? It's just empathy. Everyone has it to some level. To understand someone else's feelings was one of the hallmarks of humanity. It seemed to be the root of all moral codes, even. That would be incredibly useful, was Asuka's thought. It wasn't psychic, it wasn't invasive, yet it would serve her in every situation. As Shinji explained, it only required extending her awareness of others' presence. The personal AT field wasn't a location per se, but a signature upon Tannhauser warp space. Of course, that wasn't the end of it. Asuka needed more than tricks. He could feel it. She wanted true power. The capacity to destroy all that dared stand in her way. To fight and prevail against which seeks to harm those she chose to protect. He could understand that. Try this out with the Ava's AT field next time, he whispered into her ear. She giggled. In their swimsuits and leaning upon each other, they looked quite the stereotypical young couple. Shinji had already figured out a way to muffle the air around them, to make sounds more difficult to hear from the outside. Tricks, and some useful perhaps, but he far preferred the might of the Evangelion. And reshape continents, Shinji finished. The boys' hut had to be abandoned. It was hard to maintain secrecy when so many knew about it. The grown-ups and military were understandably suspicious at how well prepared the children were for a siege. Fortunately, the boss was still an unknown. Some of the boys had died in the Angel attack. Out of guilt, surviving members became even more close-mouthed about their orders. The game. Those who played it were saved by it. Those who abandoned the word, who thought their own judgments and their own strengths were enough. They lost their lives. Their little game wasn't just a game, they realised. They had to hide it even more from the grown-ups, or the blame for those who died would fall upon their admittedly suspicious activities. For those lives lost and saved, they couldn't bear the thought of any condemnation towards their boss or the book. For a full month, the children had no classes. They were free to play as they wanted. Unfortunately, they had to abandon the hut, as it was already known to the big uns. They played and they ran about, their numbers dwindling by the day as families moved away from Tokyo Free. There were also a few new children, from workers and military families moving in, but a certain distrust was there. Nozomi had predicted, correctly too, that some grown-ups were keeping a keen eye on the activities of their children. Even their usual haunts and frolics seemed to be less fun. The boys were infiltrating. They had to wait until the word to get up and at him arrived. They could mobilise without a hut. They had several backup places, actually, but they couldn't gather in the needed numbers without evoking suspicion. Simply, the critical mass of boys couldn't be reached. Kodama Nozomi and Suzuhara Marie had to deal with organising the boys' elements and keeping them from being too bored. The Tokyo Free chapter was broken up into littler rifts by the book. Instead of one hut where the children could feel safe and secure, they had little hangout places like parks and arcades where they wasted time in senseless play. It was astounding, even to them, that there was an actual difference. They missed the missions. Officially, the boys had the underboss, or another /underboss, in the form of Round Boy. The individual chapters were ruled by a council of knobs from all over the city, each the good boy of their individual little mobs, usually of different streets and schools. Tokyo Free's knob leadership took a big hit, and forcing the boys to rely more and more on the two girls for guidance. Newcomers, some of the boys from other chapters, had expected to rebuild the knob rule, and were stifling under the continued need to keep to the ground. Then the word was spread that a boys' hut was prepared. The former hut was quickly razed by Hoko Construction as the condemned property order went through from the Maji's database. A video store occupied the spot, its owners unaware of the tunnels underneath. Nothing should be traced towards Shinji Ikari. It wasn't yet time. The new sanctuary was beside a video arcade. The owners took a blind eye to kids going in and leaving through the back door. They were very well equipped to ensure the safety of the children. Technically, they could be called mercenaries, though most had been soldiers and police. If they had qualms about merely babysitting, the hefty weekly contracts silenced that. Millions? Just to loaf around? The worst-case scenario was pretty darn good, even. The intelligence network set up for the younger Ikari had actually taken that long to select only the most reliable people. The boys gathered in their new grander location, a movie theatre under construction. There were less than 90 of them, seated all at the front rows. These were the knobs of the city mobs. The oldest there was 14, the same age as the pilots. He came all the way from Sendai, his parents employed by Hoko Construction. He'd adapted rather quickly to the way Tokyo Free was won. Unsurprisingly, the boys knew a lot. Much of it close to the truth, but cloaked in the tone of mythology. Hiraki Nozomi went up to the stage and began to speak, or more like preach, of the happenings in Tokyo Free. She told them of what the boys had done during each attack, how they had helped the people of Tokyo Free. She wound up with,
"And the Gretches went into their holes and the boys helped outside. You know's the rule. We're not allowed to carry any weapons or go to war against anyone. We're here to help. The boys are good boys. But when the wah sounds, we need to be ready. The angels are scary and they're deadly. We're not meant to tangle with them. We're here to help those who can fight. We give them the means and the reason to fight. We're not here to waste our lives or to shame those who fight for us. We're kids, we know that, but we know this is a time when we can't be ruled by fear. We're the boys, and we're going to change the world."
A loud cheer. The walls were designed to absorb noise.
Some of you think it's not good to keep secrets from your parents and older brothers and sisters. Some of you think we should be out here proud and waving the big banner around. Everything the book warns about has come true, and it's something the book really forbids us to do. They won't understand. They're just going to keep us locked away safe, not realising we can keep them from falling. We ain't safe if the ones was fighting fall down. If that happens, then we have no choice but to fight on. Some of you are just itching for a scrap. But you're really ready? This is wars, boys and girls. Do you want to fight over the dead bodies of your loved ones? You know it. We have the choice. They don't. If we goes out when the angel attacks, they's gonna follow. We're gonna get in their way. We're just gonna make things worse.
A few of the younger children began crying. They were unprepared for the frankness that the Tokyo 3 chapter dealt with things. Hearing death bringing screeches and attending so many funerals, innocence could rarely remain unbroken. They were the boys. They were hardly stupid. Their only real limitation was their size.
We wait for the war before we can do that. But there are a lot of ways we can help. Right now, we can make our parents stop worrying. We can rebuild the Gretches line. We can keep an eye on the people who looks like they can use some quick help. But most of all, what we need to do is do things by the book.
Suzuhara Marie entered the stage, carrying the "Rah! You the boys" rulebook. It wasn't big, but continually updated as questions were relayed from the boys in their huts, or from all over the Kanto region, and over the international network even. She began to read from it, her voice cute and unreasonably loud.
Time for another go. So you're only off for skulking and scheming. You want to get up and at him again. But the knobs can't make up their minds, or the big uns are still getting big-eyed. Then it's simple. To get out of the hole, you need 3 things. 1. You need the word to make it all better. Don't move until you get the word. What you going to do then without missions anyway? It's just the same thing you're doing now. You can't make up your own missions since it don't serve nobody if you get caught. If there's something you need done, can it be done without involving the whole might of the boys? Only the word may move the boys. 2. You need the quick boss to tell you what to do and when to do it. This boss is bigger than the knobs, but don't make up the missions. The quick boss needs to look at the situation from a high place, to talk to the biggins without them knowing about what we's really after. The boys have assets. We need to keep you and Dee safe. We cares about yous, so cares about each other. Don't get yourself trapped by the biggins. 3. The word and the quick boss happen at the same time as the distraction. Usually this is school. It's not so hard if you get to see all your buddies again. If the hut is broken, then usually you need to secure the new point. You know you're ready for another go when you get these things. Remember, the boys are smart. Don't talk about the boys. Don't let them see what we can do. We need to be cunning and act when they least expect it. The boys protect themselves in the place where we live.
Nozomi continued as Marie shut the book.
Other places can afford to have the boys operating more openly. This here is where it matters. This here is where it's important that we by the book, or we'll be caught and made to stop by the biggins. We're useful here, and by the boss we're going to be useful some more. We got the word,
one of the children said out loud.
Do we have the word? Yes, this is the word. Straight for the boss. Tokyo 3 chapter. Wake up, boys. It's time for mashing.
Instead of cheers, frenzied hubbub spread throughout the gathered children. To many, the boss was a mythical figure. The newer ones didn't even think he was real in the first place.
What about the second?
Asked the boy from Shinji's hometown.
What's going to be the quick boss?
The 2 girls looked at each other, then off stage.
It's all right. You can come out now,
said Nozomi. The boys had little difficulty recognising the newcomer. Rei Ayanami was a distinctive sight after all. They were nervous, near panicking. She was, by being so visible in media and an actual authority. She was one of the big uns. She went over to the mic, the 2 younger girls bowing slightly and moving aside. She tapped the mic and smiled slightly. It was like time stopped. Rei could seem pretty motherly when she had to be, not to mention just pretty.
Hello, boys, she said.
I'm the boss now. The boys erupted into shouting. For one thing, she wasn't a boy. That wasn't so much a problem, as the boys were gender neutral about leadership that way, as that she didn't rise from the recognised ranks of the boys. She was older than most of them. She was known to many grown-ups, which was contrary to the secretive nature of their order. It smelt like a takeover. They wouldn't stand for it.
Why should we listen to you?
Someone shouted. I'm the biggest, she said softly. She gripped the metal stand of the microphone and easily bent it between her fingers. She added several more curves and loops, until the stainless steel rod resembled the jagged skull-like symbol of the Boyz. She threw it down, and there was a loud clang. I'm the strongest. Her voice was uncompromising and heard by all. Her thin smile remained. And I need your help. Everyone there was struck numb. Of course they were afraid. However, all it took was for someone to breathe out, Awesome! And they all broke into a cheer. They'd all seen Evangelion Fantasy Battle. She was, yes, scary. Her stature was small, and her poise was, indeed, that of a lady. By the book, the strong protects the weak. And did she not, as an Evangelion pilot, already protect all of them? Ray smiled wider, which sent them all nearly frenzied with enthusiasm. Oh, we so gonna have some fun times here, she said softly. Looking at all the young faces, she felt so filled with energy. More than anything, Ray desperately needed something to protect. Watching them, she felt more human than she had ever felt before. Thank you, she whispered silently towards Shinji. The world before his arrival was such a dark place. Their joy lights up the world. He was right. Shinji's plan was sound. The defenders of the city could fight more effectively if they didn't have to worry about the safety of their loved ones. At the same time, they were an excellent means of directing public opinion. Like a magician shuffling cards with one hand, pulling rabbits out of a hat with the other, each serving as a distraction for the other. It might not have been such a good idea, however, to mix impressionable youngsters with someone who so exemplified living by the book and had very little problem with the idea of deeming him a figure worthy of worship. Makoto was in an understandably bad mood as he left the commander's office. 1 month's pay! He'd need to hang around Ministorm Studios more often and mooch off their coffee and pastries just to survive. Muttering curses under his breath, not paying any attention to his surroundings, and indeed heading off for nowhere in particular, he found himself at NERV's underground pool. He stood by the entrance, blinking. Why did he feel drawn to this place? He peered into the place, feeling dirty, like a voyeur. He couldn't trust the words he'd said about Shinji Ikari, though even through a TV screen, he, and others, could tell that he really believed it back then. He couldn't really explain it well, but he had faith that as long as the boy fought for humanity, things would be alright. Certainly he had a good track record so far. Shinji was a good boy, deserving of their support. However, that conviction, that eloquence, the nerdish young lieutenant could hardly believe that came from himself. That was everything he wanted to be, brave and unflinching, and it was also vague in his memory. What the hell was he thinking? It frightened him to lose control, and even more so the feeling that he liked it. It'd be better if he did surrender to that force. He dimly remembered the feeling touching eternity, of being so powerful and immovable as a part of something greater. He feared not only losing himself, but that himself as he stood at that moment seemed so worthless in comparison. Makoto Hyuga was too far to hear anything. He did see Shinji Ikari walk on water and show Asuka how to do the same. He was glowing faintly. She seemed to be siphoning off the aura. He rubbed at his eyes. He looked again. He wasn't dreaming. There was no golden glow, though. Makoto watched as Shinji brought Asuka into impossible feats done with casual ease, their motions into a rather deceptively cosy scene. He was watching from the far end of the necessarily large room. He felt it, more than saw it, that Shinji had turned his head and directed his notice towards him. He fled from the scene, his mind reeling with the implications. Unsurprisingly, as he did work for NERV, his first thought was that Shinji was an angel. However, as he calmed down, he realised that with all the medical checks they had done, that should be impossible to hide. So, some form of experimental technology? Telekinesis was possible, after all. If he was an angel and that was an AT field, shouldn't NERV be ringing all over with alarms? Just because it looked like a duck, and it cracked like a duck, means it might still be a decoy. The boy just might be something special. As a sensible young officer of NERV, thoughts of divinity were the last in his mind. Makoto swore not to let what he'd seen adversely influence his opinion of the boy. He was still humanity's best hope for survival. He was sitting under a staircase, muttering to himself. Things were getting crazy. He couldn't even trust his own mind. He got up and dusted himself off. Best to just forget about it all and go back to work. There had to be a rational explanation.
Hyuga-senpai?
He looked up and saw Kaede Agano standing over him, looking uncertain. Oh, is it time for shift change already? Her expression drooped. Makoto might as well have put as much notice to her as a light bulb. Stupid uniforms covering too much skin, she mumbled.
We're in the cafeteria, senpai.
He blinked and looked around. Oh, so we are. He looked up again towards Kaede. Have I been sleeping?
Your eyes were closed, but looked like you were thinking deeply.
She put a hand over her mouth and looked away. Dark, brooding silence. He was still the nice guy, but his undisguised irritation at the NERV commander did hint at courage and danger. To her, at least. Other employees around her were giving her an "Are you insane?" look. The tent of Gendo Akari's displeasure still hung around the lieutenant. She was determined, however, as she saw it as her chance to offer her support.
May I talk to you for a moment?
She asked. Sure, have a seat. Makoto sighed. Do you need something?
I mean, alone.
He sighed some more. Those around him groaned. Why was it that men could be so selectively obtuse? Ordinarily, a cute young woman like Kaede talking to him would be cause for good cheer, unless the rumour was true about his taste for older women. Makoto's gaze was growing distant again. He frowned and tapped at the side of his head. Sure, he responded, following still as if dazed, and a knowing of just how much she was blushing at all the stares. That Hyuga was a lucky guy. He wouldn't agree.
I've heard you collect manga and light novels, senpai. Is that true?
He chuckled coarsely. It does seem childish, doesn't it?
Not at all,
she replied hotly.
It's not a weird hobby.
But I don't just collect manga. He smiled slightly at her, his glasses glinting. He'd long practiced at defending his pastime. I collect hope. I bring together dreams. We used to be able to express these so freely, and someday we might again. It might be seen as trying to escape from reality, but... He sighed again. That's only a natural thing for humans to do, right? If we lacked the power to make our world more sensible or more interesting. She nodded.
But wouldn't it be better to do something instead of just hoping for things that won't happen?
It took all her courage to accept the push from her friends. It was better to risk and regret than always wondering if she'd only done one simple thing. In the end, the stories we hear, the sights we hear, matter only in how it changes us. But look, sometimes it's worth it just to have fun, right? What did you really want to talk about? He gave an intense but kindly stare.
Here!
The one hand she kept hidden behind her back held a wrapped package, which she shoved at him.
I saw this at the store. It's not much, but I thought you might like it.
She needed an icebreaker. At the advice of her friend Satsuki Ui's research, Kaede had asked the store manager of Hinano's for something new that he was sure Makoto didn't already own. Luckily, he just had something just like that, a surreal light novel series that he got just recently. Apparently people were more becoming willing to embrace the themes of existentialism and its counterpoints. Makoto opened the package. Oh, it's already a volume collection. He took a look at the title. Volumes 1 to 5, The Melancholy of...
I hope you found it interesting,
said Kaede.
Cheer up, senpai. At least, even if our life seems a bit out of control, at least we still have the ability to change it.
Then, after accepting his thanks, she fled. Huh, said Makoto. Strange girl. He'd never really known how to deal with exuberant people. He looked down at the book. It was a light novel, evoking the innocent and exuberant daydreams of an earlier age. Well, he supposed, if he was going to dip into his savings just to survive, then old Hinano would have to make do without him for the month. The book was probably the last new book he'd take from the place. He smiled and sighed again, but this time in relief. At least he didn't seem to be alone in NERV. Yeah, no matter how much of an arse Gendo might be, it was worth it to stick around for the other people. He didn't have to fear contact with others. Later that night, he began reading. He supposed he could use a break from the grim brainstorming for Evangelion Fantasy Battles Bible. He supposed Kadama Haraki was exuberant too. Strange. He wasn't uncomfortable in dealing with her, though she was an attractive woman. He didn't suffer the usual conversational deadblocks and hesitation. Halfway through the first volume, he sat up, sweating and sceptical. Oh hell. It can't be that simple, can it? Yes, he remembered. That ever-present look on Shinji's face. Not quite apathy, not quite despair, the exact opposite of joy. Yes. Oh no. He had a feeling that if Shinji Ikari ever took notice of this story, the world would divide by zero. In his room at night, he thought, perhaps the difference was that Shinji was aware and was trying to minimize it. He had the exact opposite personality, cautious and predetermined instead of all-out idiotic enthusiasm. He chuckled dryly. Okay, perhaps that was one way of looking at things. It was still too fanciful, though. He could just pray that the future would work out somehow. There was no better person to put that trust into than the boy who looked already so weary with carrying the weight of the world. But it is true that only by exercise do we develop strength. He sighed and fell back on his bed. Even faith has to benefit from it. Kyoto 2 was an entirely different beast from Tokyo 3, with an entirely different set of people and a different view of recent events. That Rika Izuna continued to find gainful employment there, despite the obvious slant of her journalism, was testament to that her perception of events wasn't entirely unique. It would be unfair to deem Kyoto 2 as elitist and Tokyo 3 as troublemakers, but that was the gist of it. Tokyo 3 was engineered to become the new capital, despite the hopes of Kyoto 2. Whereas the city over the geofront was gleaming new, Kyoto 2 had merely relocated further inland, and still had all the traditional trappings of pre-impact Japan. They considered themselves the true carriers of Japanese authority. It had the Kyoto Restoration University, as a replacement for the sunken Tokyo University. The staff of the latter had fled inland, with most dying in impact. The new city had moved up the mountains towards Sakai, and carried with it painstakingly preserved sections of the Imperial Palace, to be rebuilt with lavish care upon a new sit. It was a pity there was no emperor to occupy it. The loss of an unbroken dynasty stretching across thousands of years perhaps contributed to their current mania. A fractured culture even at the best of times, they had to fight the steadily eroding cultural legacy amidst the harsh and uncertain future. It had the advantage over Tokyo 3's broadcast services in larger, more established facilities and a worldwide audience. In any other city in Honshu, the representatives of NERV would have been greeted as like conquering heroes. In second Kyoto, however, there was dignified restraint. There were also those who saw them with suspicion. The wild, troublesome reputation of those from third Tokyo was perhaps justifiable. Weirdness followed them. Worst comes to worst, the Angels would decide to drop by in second Kyoto instead of third Tokyo. It didn't help their reputation any that instead of arriving via limo like any sensible public personage, NERV burst into the scene carried by the simply massive Hotaru-class VTOL carrier. Without an Ava, of course. Shinji Ikari and Principal Eternus, if together, equalled massive evacuations from an obviously doomed metropolis. Flashy, unashamed, pushy. That was the reigning attitude of NERV. Grim-faced military kept back the press as the representatives unboarded. Cameras zoomed into faces, and flashes accompanied the sight of Vice Commander Kozo Futsuki. More flashes as 3 teens emerged, Suzuhara, Ada and Haraki. A few forgettable faces were next, aides and whatnot, though the reporters thought that the spectacle was over. Then Shinji Ikari went out, squinting at the sun, and things started to get crazy. Rika Izuna watched with savage anticipation as the players gathered on the stage. The public inquiry was being held in a grand auditorium, and there was quite a farcical air to the whole proceedings. There was anticipation well disproportional to the event, as if it was a rock concert or something. She was at the front row, ready and waiting with questions that should distinguish her from the rest of the press. It was starting. There were 3 panels to the discussion, 3 long tables arranged in a rough U facing the crowd. On the far left were the representatives of the JSSDF and INHIS. Among them a tired-looking General Akira, and the younger, looking more work, General Asagiri. They had to fight tooth and nail for the right to build up forces around the city, NERV and UN reluctant to be damned. Fortunately, Tokito of INHIS was obliging to help. Of course, he made money with any sort of deployment. But aside from the seemingly depthless reserve of his enthusiasm, it was like there was a similar bankroll ready to be used up in fortifications and munitions, completely separate from the UN contract. More and more, INHIS was proving to be an independent institution in its own right, similar to NERV. And that was something that irritated many. The man carried to the inquiry a scale model of the land dreadnought, which he toyed with while rating.
Stop.
Stop, he whispered as he moved the fully articulate model on the table. He wished he'd brought along the diorama. Those around him were unsure if he was deliberately pretending to be deranged or if he'd simply cracked from all the stress. Either way, they had to remind themselves not to underestimate the man's cunning or determination or faith in his work. Mana Kirishima was seated there, next to him in full dress uniform, her large hat pulled over her eyes. She sat primly and apparently unconcerned with everything around her. She certainly made for an interesting sight, a perfect picture opportunity. At the middle table were the fact-finding committee, filled with prominent members of the Diet and the actual Japanese SDF, although Japan had allowed the remaining of that back into just the Army, Navy and Air Force. The JSSDF were formed from these, having the same equipment and training to balance out each other. Both the politicians and the conventional military had of course justified misgivings about handing even more power to either the UN or NERV, neither really under their authority. The NERV representatives were an odd group. For one thing, only Futsuki was the grown-up in that collection. Officially, NERV needed only one person to answer all the questions. The children was just there as a favour to publicity. He looked as stony as ever, a patient stillness in contrast to Gendo's tension silence. Kensuke was looking longingly over to the other side of the stage, at the Magno's Tancred model. Damn that Takita! Outmanoeuvred again! He'd be counselled against appearing childish and unprofessional. Then the project chief pulls that act. Toji and Akari had moved their chairs closer together, and out of sight their hands were linked. They waited for their turn without fear. Shinji Akari seemed to be sleeping. It was disrespectful to the proceedings to some, but explained away by that he was still weak. It had only been 2 days since he got out of a month-long coma. It was one of those things that made people think things could have been handled better. The committee was saying again about how the inquiry was not to accuse, but merely to better answer questions still remaining and to postulate future options. What a bunch of bullcrap, muttered the cameraman by her side. It's not us who had to suffer. Why can't they just leave it alone?
You can't trust NERV, Rikazuna replied. Even if you believe all their propaganda about saving the Earth, the fact that they keep it all so secret and prevent anyone else from even trying is too suspicious.
I can't see how you could even pretend to be unbiased here. Greed's there on either side. NERV just has control and doesn't want it to share.
She sniffed contemptuously. It's the camera that sees, not you. You don't get to make any valued judgments here. That's for me and the viewers.
She bid him into silence.
Stupid fools, clinging to their little city as if they were all that matters in the world. They can't fight change forever, especially not now.
But shh!
They're starting.
There was a great screen off to one side, where the snatches of actual footage from the battle were replayed, and NERV's official report of the event was recounted. The sheer size of Matarael still boggled the mind. People had known angels were giant monsters, but not that big. Everyone spared a glance for Shinji Akari seated there with his hands crossed over his chest. Thin, sallow, and nodding off into a weak nap. He had defeated it in less than a minute and a half. Why so quick? Why so easy? At the same time, why was he injured so? These were things only the boy could really answer. The accounts at the ground were less precise, reliant upon after-event accounts. The praise given over to NERV and the JSSDF soldiers were effulgent, culminating in the great scoop that was Makoto's speech over the rain. Shinji Akari might have twitched a bit, his shoulders drooping lower in dismay. Maybe it was time to reconsider holding the Emperor as a role model. He could just hear the Farseer salivating. No. Then the report started to turn negative. The death toll ran into the thousands. The response of the JSSDF was stemmed by their distance from Tokyo 3. Only the base nearby to house Magnos Tancred could quickly send help, and it lacked both men and machines sufficient for the task. More as guards for the Trident than any hope of relief. Shelters broken open. Buildings collapsed under spindly but still ruinous steps, acid eating into everything it came in contact with. That the end of the battle was so quick and easy seemed like an insult to all that had happened before it. The response to the attack, with gruesome emphasis upon what even the officials had to call the angel spawn and their admitted straightforward abilities, could be called admirable and haphazard. NERV might be called to answer for criminal negligence, except that, of course, the inquiry wasn't meant to accuse. There was a single podium facing the committee. The sub-commander sighed as he went up to speak. Gendo had little patience of politics. He'd probably end up having them all shot as payment for the indignity. Fuyutsuki, however, planned on being as cooperative as possible to smooth the way for NERV. In a few more months, these drunk revolutionary power would be obsolete anyway. Until then, they could still do some damage. "You cannot truly prepare for the unexpected," he said, to their ill-disguised attack on NERV's competence. "All angels encountered up to that point have always been of massive scale. In fact, it was the most massive encountered thus far. That it could spawn smaller attack forms is not something anyone could have envisioned." "Apparently someone did," said the defense minister. He managed a slight chuckle. "Surely you're not saying we should take cues from a movie? There's one important reason why NERV is the only one capable of handling angels." "You mean the AT field?" was the irritated response from the Internal Affairs Minister. "After all this time, there's no way for anyone else to replicate it?" He bent aside to listen to Dr. Kobayashi, one of the leading physicists not employed by NERV. "It seems that the last angel didn't make much use of it." "The AT field is the perfect weapon, able to turn from defense to offense in an instant. This is why angels are so fearsome." He shrugged eloquently. "It's hard to believe that anything smaller than their usual size could produce it, or that it would result to more mundane ways of attacking the city." Perfect. To say that was to insult pretty much all of human invention. NERV seemed like such an upstart little organisation for claiming glory that wasn't even really theirs. "Then how is it that NERV could defeat them so easily? Obviously there are flaws in the ability." Fuyutsuki smirked a bit. This would surely piss them off even more. "No, it's just that Shinji Ikari is just that much better at it." The boy groaned. Better that this inquiry not be televised and Asuka not watching. Cameras. Oh, damn it to hell. Asuka. As if her shouting, do it to me, was not troublesome enough at practice. Misato's laughter rising over the comms, the almost audible headaches from her old friend. Maya's attempts to restrain Asuka only seemed like jealousy to less objective observers. Gendo, as much as he pretended not to care, would surely take measures to slow the erosion of his own stature in the eyes of others. If fear of the older Ikari was equalised or surpassed by awe for the younger, not even he could tell what would happen. The committee all frowned slightly. They each bore the marks of all the compromises and all the sacrifices they had to perform just to bring the country from the brink. In many ways they deserved the right of being the nation's saviours, and were unwilling to give that up to young upstarts. Their motives weren't purely selfish. Some wanted to simply help, but were continually rebuffed as useless. NERV was just a collection of people. The Ava were simply weapons, and Shinji Ikari's cultish popularity was just unhealthy. It was one thing to deem current events as the populist war of humanity, but the facts were that the attacks were spaced well apart and the rest of the world was simply at peace. It was only Tokyo 3 that knew violence. There was no war to touch the lives of any others. It was hard to take doom raving seriously. The threat of third impact was a bludgeon for compliance. At the same time, the funds and manpower being diverted towards that one city was immense. The place was in a constant economic boom. They fed upon the undeserved tribute, fanning fears just to maintain their way of life. It makes no sense at all to those who had to pay for it out of their own pockets. Setting that aside, the damage wouldn't have been so severe if NERV simply had advance warning. It's too coincidental that your power supply should shut down at the moment an angel attacks. We must call into question whether it's wise to give so much control over to one computer. Ironically, that would actually be far safer than piecemeal systems linked together. As the first of its kind, the Magi's self-monitoring and self-protection systems are top-notch. If the city's all part of one big coherent system, there should be no way for a single compromised part to evade notice. This was tested several times. The Vice Commander shrugged again. Unfortunately, the Magi itself is dependent upon power. Primary, backup, and emergency power to fail all at once is impossible by accident. The theory that it's sabotage seems rather far-fetched. The Defence Minister put his hands together under his chin. It brings to mind not only who should desire that NERV lose the battle, but how that's possible in the first place. Or more accurately, how can NERV even allow such infiltration at such a level? Your need for absolute security is one of the reasons why you continue to disallow foreign observers in cooperative endeavours. Fuyutsuki smiled thinly. The only reasonable conclusion is that it was a fundamental flaw in the construction of NERV's facilities. A shutdown command, bringing down all our defences, making it easier to attack with, say, conventional forces. Deliberate
and appropriated by the enemy.
Just what are you implying?
Someday, somehow, should NERV gather too much power into itself, it seems that someone had prepared for the eventuality. The old man kept his unfriendly smile. If you believe it's nothing more than conspiracy theory, then consider this. Would you have not wanted such a useful switch?
The government paid for the construction of Tokyo 3, not designed it. Who do you imply may have planned this switch? The government shouldn't have to need that just to expect compliance from a civilian operation. You do well not to raise baseless accusations, and will not stand for such artful dodges.
The smile twitched with real amusement. I merely asked to consider it in context. There are many other organizations with an interest in NERV. I don't mean to point any fingers unnecessarily. However, the switch does exist. It has been removed. Contemplations on who could have triggered it is not for us to ponder at this point. Please accept my assurances that it will not happen again. The committee glanced at each other. The old man was just too canny. He wouldn't be trapped so easily. They decided to move on.
Koichike Ada, born September 12, 2001. Toshi Suzihara, born December 26, 2001. Hikari Hiraki, born February 18, 2002. You three have quite a reputation. Many have sworn you saved their lives, but we're curious about how you seem to have such proficiency with weapons, and of course, how you got your hands on them in the first place.
There being three of them, they were asked from their seats. General Asagiri stood up, holding his mic.
May I answer that? Thank you. Suzihara and Hiraki were given these by JSSDF Marines, and it was well within legal rights to temporarily call upon able citizens, no matter what age, during times of emergency. Perhaps it would have been better if adults were given the weapons, but there were no such persons around, and it wouldn't have been any more dangerous for them to have guns than to stand around helpless.
It's to our understanding that bolt pistols and bolt rifles are not standard JSSDF equipment.
I'm sure you'll find that Pattern Sakura is duly licensed to create such weapons for testing purposes. Ordinary weapons have proven to be less effective, given the Angel Spawn ability to rapidly heal, but the massive damage of bolt rounds does overwhelm even that. It is also within legality to requisition his armory or distribute the guns to the populace.
Putting weapons in the hands of minors is still a serious breach of protocol.
But one with precedent. In times of emergency and when enemies vastly outnumber the defenders, every gun helps. Their proficiency, it depends upon the definition. Perhaps they do have the aptitude, but by military definition of proficiency, not even close.
Lie. Blatant, bold lie. But it was so rational it had to be the truth. The teens had shown fire discipline that the Marines had to be puzzled over. And respect. They had to report to him first, and having received Shinji Kari's message, General Asagiri decided punishing people for saving lives was not something he wanted to do.
Suzihara, Hiraki, is this account true?
It's as accurate as far as it could be, sir,
Toji shouted nervously.
It's not like we had any choice,
Hikari added in a more even voice.
My little sister would have died if we hadn't taken arms.
Very well.
The defence minister looked at Kensuke, who sat slouched over with his glasses glinting oddly.
Mr. Ada, please come forward.
The team went over to the podium and waited. The committee looked meaningfully at the JSSDF/in his panel and continued.
Your friends might have the legal recourse of being pushed into action out of necessity. You, however, organised the defence of Tokyo 3 First Municipal Junior High instead of sending people into the shelters, and passed around functional bolt pistols and rifles. While you applaud your actions, it all implies both premeditation and access to items you, frankly, shouldn't be able to have. Do you understand the illegal nature of your actions?
Yes, he replied.
Do you know this, as you were performing such actions of obtaining guns without license, bringing them into public place, hiding them in a public place, and then not only using such illegal arms, but giving it to unlicensed civilians?
Yes, I knew I was breaking the law. Kensuke smiled a bit. What else would you have had us do? Run to the nearest shelter where we could be killed and eaten by the angel spawn when they break through? I'm sure that you've seen too many examples of that having occurred.
There were also shelters that survived.
However, the committee did recognise this diluted their message about NERV's incompetence in citizen protection.
Your only duty as a citizen was to seek refuge and not get in the way of those duly designated to serve in such a capacity.
The right to self-defense is a basic and essential human right as defined in many legal documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We are at war, sir. Extreme circumstances call for extreme measures.
I do not need for you to lecture us about international law, Mr. Ada, and even so, the right to self-defense does not cover these actions, which do have a situational identity. Do you know where it falls, Mr. Ada? You must understand this now. It is an act linked to terrorism.
The crowd of onlookers and reporters began to murmur, agreeing and disagreeing with the statement.
The intentions, the results. We can forgive, but we must question. We must ensure this is seen as something more risky than rewarding. According to sworn testimony, you made statements to the effect that Shinji Ikari wanted you to fight. Did you do this according to his suggestion? To what extent was his preparation in these acts?
In a word, none. Shinji tends to worry unnecessarily. No, it was all me.
Hauling off heavy crates in the dead of night? Of course not. Kensuke humphed. That's what minions were for.
For yourself? You hold several crates worth of weapons and ammunition up to the highest level of your school, hook them into chains, dump them into the water tank, set up demolition charges, all without making undue noise or being noticed? This stretches believability, Mr. Ada. Who else helped you in this endeavour?
It's much easier if you can float the things up to the roof of an AT field. Silent, swift, and utterly effortless. Of course, he mused. I can't really say that here.
1. Electric wagon. 2. Pulleys and levers. 3. Sneak things in piece by piece over the course of several months. You'd actually be surprised how much insanity people don't even want to think about getting involved in.
They all just decided not to even take the hassle back at Tokyo 3, even if he was roaming around at midnight. It wasn't as if Kensuke, a basically harmless nut, would do something to really harm the school. His reputation as a joker and a showman, demonstrating tricks of technology, made rules around him lax in enforcement. There was a reason he was known as Adeptus Mechanicus Ada, his award-winning aptitude with machines. He was a celebrity. It was that complacency, that slow tolerance for deviance from social norms, that was troubling to them. Clearly it only proved that giving someone an inch was to let them have a mile.
How do you explain what you said, then?
It's simple. Shinji's an Ava pilot. He protects the city right from the front line, but he can't be everywhere at once. He can only protect us from the angels. Technically, the angel spawn might be that, but he couldn't protect us from enemies of that size. So because I know Shinji doesn't want to see people dying in our city, it was up to us to defend ourselves. Of course, he'd wanted us to fight. It was better than laying down and dying. What's the point of the Ava pilots going out there if the people themselves are dying uselessly?
Then this brings us back to the subject of illegal arms. Just where did you get those weapons?
It was a grave concern, for if a junior high student could get his hands on guns of such force, then practically no one was safe. Kensuke pushed his glasses up.
I got them direct from the factory.
He had little qualm in exposing his sources. For all the crazy stuff they pulled back in Tokyo 3, he knew it was unrealistic they would get away with all of them.
And just who is this manufacturer?
The defense minister tapped at his mic.
It is to our knowledge that the bookstore you work in is directly behind a gun shop, the one owned by Pattern Shirakawa Sakura, who is the known producer of bolt weapons.
I never once entered Neon Star's gun selling by the front or back door, for that matter.
The literal truth. The old man was questioned of his involvement. He denied ever allowing the boy in. No, he didn't know that the bookstore behind his shop contained Kensuke Ada. Was he supposed to care? He was licensed to make bolt weapons, true, but not for sale to anyone. The old man had his reputation as a grumpy old goose who didn't tolerate any nonsense from the young. Even the preliminary inquiry could only get the thought that he'd probably just strangled the boy out of sheer irritation. There was nothing in Paddon-san that seemed grandfatherly or willingly taking on patient instruction of an apprentice.
No. Come on! Who can really mass-produce bolt guns?
Kensuke continued. New Nippon Heavy Industries Solidarity, said several people at the same time, from the committee to Kensuke and Representative Takita himself. The fact-finding panel didn't react in any way, even as the audience began to murmur about that.
We will not deny the results of your actions, but the law is broken and with deliberate intent.
It was setting an absolutely dangerous precedent.
Are you prepared to accept the consequences of your actions?
Kensuke grinned.
I already did. The law's not a shield that could have protected us. Only faith, duty, and firepower.
can stand between you and something screaming for your blood.
Well, I can understand the context, Mr. Ada. It's not your right to decide these things for other people. Do you have any idea of the potential disaster you are courting? To prepare so far, to enter into a conspiracy with a corporation, surely you must see how insane that looks. The results are there, but we must question the reality of your intent.
It was a valid fear, was it not? The audience saw that these teens, young warriors, were just a shade removed from young mass murderers. What were they really up to in Tokyo 3, that a boy would take it upon himself to arm up, to conduct with such messianic zeal? That simply stank of a society ready to crumble into nothing.
What are you so afraid of?
Everyone turned to the speaker, Hikari Hiraki, who felt obliged to defend her friend.
Kensuke, he doesn't really know restraint. He likes guns a little too much for his own good. But he's not someone who puts a low value on the lives of other people.
She gripped Toji's hand and drew strength from that. Normally she would have been so afraid of speaking directly towards recognised authority.
Are you seriously thinking what he did would be repeated in other cities? Even here?
Children should not be doing these things. It's a dangerous example and erodes social order. The police and the military exist for that purpose, and vigilantism is still a crime.
You're afraid it would look like people don't really need you,
said Hikari. She was wearing her usual red on black jacket. All she had to do was set aside fear.
When the laws you make aren't followed, it's like your own efforts and your own authority is worthless.
When those efforts fail, and the laws only serve as obstructions for doing the right thing. You may be right, added Kensuke, grinning wildly. An uproar arose through the hall at their impudence. There was a gavel upon which the defence minister banged upon.
Order! Order!
He scowled at the delegation from NERV.
I will not have the dignity of these proceedings insulted by these children. It's clear we should not have expected that you would really understand how the mature world works.
You broke it the moment you felt you needed to say that, muttered Futsuki. He was only 2 years older than the minister. Kensuke opened his mouth to say something even more unwise, but Shiro Takita stood up. I believe the real issue here is not that these children were in their full rights or reason to become heroes of convenience, but that we allowed it to happen.
That's right,
Rikazuna whispered from below.
The pilots of the Avon Trident can't be touched, but Innes is still answerable to the government. I can't believe they'd be so stupid to flaunt their products like that.
They did save lives, her cameraman had to respond.
But it's still stupid.
The cameraman just sighed at that. He looked around at the uncertain faces. No one was really harmed by what happened, so all this talk about what could have been was just fanning fear. At least that's what it appeared to him. But then he knew he wasn't really all that smart in the first place. Maybe it just looks too simple. He'd been so used to just following along her views. She was intelligent, an enthusiastic lover, and a good person overall. She was just so damn stubborn when she felt she was right.
That's what heroes do, don't they?
He had to say. Doing the stupid thing. When smarter people would just leave it alone, when they'd rather save their lives and fall back into the faceless sweep of history. Shh!
Yes. Mr. Ada, you are excused.
As Shiro Takita took the stand, his credentials were likewise rattled off.
And you, Mr. Takita, did you have foreknowledge of these actions?
That's right.
Did Mr. Ada approach you, or was it the other way around?
Kensuke Ada had a plan, but lacked the resources to carry it out. I provided those resources. The plan given to me was simply for testing, but I suppose an angel attack does fulfill the description.
That seems unrealistic,
said the defence minister.
Hiding caches of illegal weapons all around the city, all at the instigation of one boy? That's illogical.
The other way was more reasonable, and the boy was just a patsy excuse. That was what everyone, including NERV, thought. Such idealism was impossible for such big business.
You do realise that it seems more like the preamble to an armed insurrection?
Rikazuna groaned.
I can't believe they actually said that. It's possible, but there's not enough guns for the job. Innes might be just a front for something or someone else that wants to take over, but I don't think it's that. There's only one reason why they'd want to put weapons in a school.
And what is it? The cameraman was panning across the stage, from Kirishima from the far left to the JSSDF generals looking unconcerned, to Shinji at the far right, seemed still with his eyes shut. Strangely, both young teens seemed like silent anchors. The reporter made a face.
Something to do with Shinji Ikari, of course. We don't know if it's to protect him or kill him. Even if Ada is his friends, having the guns there is too convenient for someone else.
But isn't a sniper even more convenient for that? She sighed.
Yes. Nothing about that city makes sense.
Because it would seem like they had known there would be an attack on the school, and bolt rounds defeat most normal body armour.
Is it so hard to believe?
It would have been better if they could make it look like the Tancred pilots, duly authorised soldiers of the JSSDF, were the ones to use the guns. Chance simply had Kensuke being the substitute. Unfortunately, Manor and company were never told about the weapons. Innis had done so entirely without the JSSDF in the loop, and as such couldn't really count on their help.
You're under oath to speak the truth, Mr. Kita. Are you really to believe that you'll let yourself be persuaded like that? You gave up deadly weapons so easily? No. What did Kensuke Ada offer in exchange for those weapons?
The his representative narrowed his gaze. He didn't like the implication.
Exchange? Perhaps it would be more accurate to say, we simply redistributed his assets out to the field. It might not have real precedent, but you will find that it was an in-company transaction.
What?
The committee passed comments to each other, and after a while returned back to the podium.
Explain further.
If they couldn't get the reputation of Innis on various immoral behaviour, then perhaps child labour laws.
Well, maybe we need to start at how the bolt weapons were made. The original design is licensed from NERV. The Great Bolter is a massive weapon firing a gyrojet projectile designed to penetrate and explode within an enemy to great effect. Each shell can shred a house, and the Great Bolter fires these in 3-round bursts. There's considerable difficulty in scaling the weapon down. The damage potential is exponential to size. Furthermore, the Great Bolter uses a magnetic feed system to ensure a rapid rate of fire. Impractical when scaled down, as it encourages jamming instead of reducing the possibility, as in the original massive design. Innis holds the manufacturing contract to produce Ava-scale bolter weapons and ammunition.
And the point to this is?
I'm getting there. Bolters have less recoil than a conventional firearm of similar size, considering that a bullet of the same caliber would be a light cannon, but still significant. This isn't a problem for the Ava, but it could break someone's arm. It's inaccurate beyond 50 metres and leaves an obvious trail back to the shooter. It suffers from limited ammunition and high cost for each gyrojet shell. It's not a gun meant for mass distribution to any army or even any ambitious armed group. What it lacks in these practical mass production aims, it makes up for in sheer power. The bolt is suited more for vehicles than infantry, as one shot can blow someone in half. The heavy bolter version may punch through the armour of a thin-skinned vehicle and explode to kill with fire and shrapnel all inside. A shot fired at the ground leaves small craters. Bolt weapons are so overkill for most situations that its use may be considered both cruel and unusual tactics.
And you handed that over so easily to a boy? Are you insane?
The bolt is impractical for any common use. The bolt pistol, on the other hand. Shiro Takita leaned over the podium and made a firing pose. Using a 17.5mm bolt round, it lacks the rude firepower of the full-size bolter. However, the same rocket propulsion makes it safer and easier to use. For its size, the rubber-tipped safe bolt has less recoil and less chance of breaking bones than a rubber-tipped bullet. The live rounds, well, their damage potential is proven. It has less moving parts than any chemical propellant-using gun, and nearly impossible to jam. Do you know who invented the bolt pistol?
I find it hard to believe.
The folders given to the committee contained the patent information. Kensuke Ada. The boy had good marks in school, but not that good. No normal teen should have been able to put together something no one had ever seen before. Even more unlikely, why no one challenged that patent. A simple, reliable design that's easy to hold and mass produce. The only real difficulty is with the ammunition. The Tokyo Free City Council recognised that without live rounds, the safe bolt pistol was safe enough that he could carry it in normal life. However, I know that the boy realises just how deadly what he made could be. They're not just toys to him. He works for us now. The his project chief looked aside and wondered if he should reveal Kensuke Ada was on the design team of the Trident. It was better than revealing Shinji Ikari's hand in things. Both he and the team were ready to serve as lightning rods for the possibility. In fact, he could use Kensuke as a convenient excuse to hide the fanciful influence of the younger Ikari. You will find it's all perfectly legal. The consultancy level of employment isn't reliant upon age, but on talent.
Legally, the employment? Perhaps, but that doesn't excuse giving deadly weapons to unlicensed civilians. The boy may have a license to use the bolt pistol, but not a real firearm. You vastly overstepped your authority in letting the boy set up those defences.
Then what do you want us to do? We'll accept the penalty if we need to, Shiro Takita shouted out. We will not regret having saved thousands of lives by preparing for the worst. You say we had no authority to do as we did, and I accept that. It was that same lack of legal recourse that kept us from going further.
Then you admit to it. You deliberately encouraged a minor to trespass and wield illegal arms.
Yes, but we overstepped NERV's boundary of authority, not yours. We live in Tokyo Free, and when under attack we're supposed to defend it. What do you want us to do? Shut down? The Trident Land Dreadnought is the only truly man-made weapon that can stand with the Evangelions. The United Nations and the JSSDF have a set deployment period with continued development assurance. Only they can shut us down. Only they can decide that we should leave the defence of all humanity upon NERV's hands. Is that what you want? At least this way, on the ground we have a fighting chance. But if it would work against the angels, then it would surely work against you. That's what this is about. That's what you're afraid of. He didn't say that, however. It would only seem direct confirmation of their suspicions upon rebellion.
Tokyo's still in Japanese soil,
Rika Izuna said offhand. She was itching for the time when the old men would just shut up in their politicking and the media could be set loose to really deliver that which the masses needed.
We can't have a corporation or children flaunt these laws, not even for supposedly preparing for the worst. The NERV should have done that. That was its right and its duty, not theirs. They're only reinforcing that failure.
That was what rankled most. Tokyo Free arrogance, as if they were the centre of the world, as if no one else mattered. As much as there was sympathy, so did their attitudes provoke antagonism from all over the world.
But they're the ones under attack, replied the cameraman. Should they have the right to decide how best to defend themselves?
No, because if we're supposed to believe that losing there would mean the end of the world, then they don't have any right to decide things for the rest of us. We have that right, to make sure it's really being done correctly. Saving a few thousand lives in Tokyo Free doesn't matter that much compared to the billions left in the world.
The needs of the many take precedence over the few, eh?
Yes, NERV needs to get that stick out of its ass and admit that even they aren't infallible. Why are they so determined to refuse help? They're hiding something. We need to know. It's our survival we're talking about here.
The simplicity of utilitarian initiative here falters, and that the situation is too volatile to mix in bureaucracy into events that require rapid response and adaptability. And of course the bureaucrats would be leery of a city that replaced them entirely. Shiro Takita decided to surrender the point. There's plenty of time later to decide this issue in court, if the government decides to bring it up that far. We're prepared to accept our responsibility. He sat down. The status quo was realigning, and they were gambling all upon the outcome. He tapped his foot in anger. Even at Innis there were those who asked why he took the risk. Then they only had to look up at Magnus Tancred and understand. The weak fear the powerful. Any trigger would do. It was actually better if it was one that they knew of beforehand, like reactive armour exploding against the shaped charge. Given their business, that seemed an apt analogy. It was hard for people to decide who was the underdog, who they should really side with as the righteous injured party. The government was right, in that if they had more involvement perhaps it could have turned out better. The JSSDF and INHIS had to be commended for initiative. NERV was always the only one that could really kill the angels. The government sounded petty, the JSSDF/INHIS compact ambitious, and NERV as remote and aloof as usual. They just didn't understand each other.
We call upon Shinji Ikari.
The team got up and faced the committee. He knew each of their names, and even some things they probably thought no one else knew. Like his father, he could see several ways to silence them, from blackmail, bribes, to outright murder. He sighed. Politics was the exercise of power. There were different forms of power, though, from potential to actual. In many ways, he supposed the inquiry was about the use of the former to hinder the movement of the latter. Society needed the bureaucracy to function effectively. Tokyo Free might find it troublesome, but Shinji decided if he wanted the world to persist beyond the possibility of third impact, that he didn't want to tear through the fabric of society unnecessarily. After all, without an administratum, no imperium, or government of any form, was possible. He was made to recount the events that led to his sortie against Matarael. He couldn't say much about the other pilots and what was going on within NERV, but slowly built up a picture of blocked tunnels, confusing passageways and a lack of communication. All radio and even landline telephones were cut. Getting down into NERV proper took time. It was unavoidable. I'm sorry. I realised we should have been faster. If it wasn't for Magnell's Tancred to buy us time, it could have been much worse. Manus still sat there refusing to react. Explaining what he did to kill the angel and get rid of the angel spawn was harder. He wasn't completely sure. It was so fast, after all. The angels seem to be composed of matter that's held together by their own AT field. It's what gives them their special properties and allows them to grow huge. It's possible to use a sufficiently powerful AT field to erode another.
Is she ever capable of generating such a field?
With the Titan modules, sure. That much power, supposed to last for 3 days? It can be drained in a few minutes. He smiled weakly. It's not easy to control. Those there were unsure of how to deal with Shinji Ikari. They couldn't understand the cultish devotion he could inspire. Seeing him in the flesh, it was well within the realms of reason to try and excise that social tumour before it became malignant.
You were told to enter NERV and fight as soon as you came to Tokyo 3. Is that correct?
At his nod, the question continued with,
Prior to that, you had no experience with combat or the military. Since then you have been fighting for NERV.
Yes, sir.
Do you know what you are, Mr. Ikari? That's called conscription.
He is free to resign from NERV at any time, Fuyutsuki interrupted. As for the sudden way he was thrust into combat, there was simply no other choice. The other pilot was incapable of duty. Yeah, right. Everyone there knew that was tantamount to being branded as coward as soon as his status as a pilot leaked out. That was his father's way of further linking his fate to the Ava. After enjoying even further isolation among the common people, either he would return or offer little resistance when they brought him back to the only place that saw worth in his existence. No one seemed to have considered he might thrive under the public eye.
In so many years, only 3 pilots have been found for the Evangelion? It's far too selective. We must ask, why?
That's what I said, Shinji thought. But that was before I realised the Ava's no mere weapon, but a vessel of pure absolute terror. We're actually this lucky there are so few of them.
NERV special status bypasses labour laws in this instance. Are you even paid for your pains, Mr. Ikari?
Money. I don't need that much, really. Most of it goes into a trust fund I can't touch until I'm 18. I'm told it's a pretty big number. Gendo had deposited an inconsequential sum compared to NERV's total assets, securing the knowledge that not even a year would see it mature.
In any given engagement you could die. What would be the use of that then?
As Fuyutsuki again interrupted with that only assured NERV did not intend for him to die but to survive long enough to collect his rages, Shinji closed his eyes.
It is easy. Only your time is precious, bright lord. You need not to tolerate this farce.
Pawns to be used and discarded, my young king. They may be replaced so easily. He looked at his open palm. The Minister of the Interior adjusted his collar. It seemed a bit tight. He was getting too old for this stress.
I don't care. Just bash something.
Very slowly, Shinji began to clench his fist. The man was ready to deliver another tirade against NERV, but stopped. He gasped for breath, but his lungs wouldn't take air. Shinji opened his hand. Something's wrong. I shouldn't do this.
Only the weak fear power. Why do you continue to refuse your own might?
Commander, even I must agree. These are fat and useless sheep our enemies feed upon. We are the wolves under the stars.
Be silent, stupid males. The young king is right. Something is wrong. Directing our abilities inward has stunted our senses to the outwards. There is like a shadow before our sight. The ground shook. Everyone went still for a moment. As far as earthquakes went, it was over quickly. They're all used to such events. The inquiry resumed. He felt oddly powerful and ashamed. He looked around at all the faces alternately confused, vain, bored, or curious. The committee was speaking again about how NERV was mishandling the situation to preserve its political uniqueness.
Mr. Ikari, the reason why you were unable to get to the Evangelion quickly was that you were sealed outside of the geofront, correct? And this is because you were at school.
The committee called for order again, and it was the Minister of the Interior that spoke out.
Another thing we lack is a legal definition of the pilot status. Are you civilians? Yet you perform duties of distinctly military nature. You cannot be military, as NERV insists your skills are needed only temporarily. There's no reason for you to be on call 24/7. This contradicts directly the supposed critical nature of your duty. Whether or not it was sabotage, the fact remains that the highly specific requirements of the Evangelion means that if something should happen to you outside of NERV, the hideously expensive thing we're forced to rely on will be useless until someone else is found that shares those same unknown qualities.
We may not neglect his education or his constitutional rights, Futsuki warned. Although Gendo technically did just that.
There is also precedent for this. People have been held as a national treasure, as containers for valuable tradition, skills, and knowledge essential to our society. Then we must inquire as to how badly NERV has mismanaged this resource. They are all still citizens of this nation. The city lies within our domains. If we must shoulder the fate of the rest of the world, then we shouldn't do anything that will make us lose faith in their eyes. I find it disturbing how haphazard the way this entire endeavour is done. Pretending things are normal, then under banner of all-out war, just throwing away all civil restraint. You all act as if it's one big game, making every act more impressive than the last, grabbing and taking without explanation. Then you wail at our unfairness if we decide we might do better. This is our world too. We live here too. We must open our eyes to the reality that the world is not for any one organisation or any one person to hold.
Scenario. Snap their twiggly little necks, sear everyone else he didn't know in the room with lightning from his fingertips, then walk back to Tokyo 3 with orchestral music booming from no readily discernible source. Wait, Mana's here. Oh, what's with that hopeful look? Shinji sighed. He didn't want to disappoint those who had faith in him. I could just mind control these bastards, but rewriting neurons is a tricky thing. It would look suspicious if half of them started bleeding out the ears in international TV. They're all suffering in their uncertainty, their doubt, their fear. It was painful to feel so powerless and unwanted. Everyone was shouting. The reporters were asking about liberties guaranteed by the new constitution and whether or not if a state of war does exist. If so, should the UN then officially bring a multinational contingent into Tokyo 3 to inspect and declare things are being properly managed? Should the law be ignored in the case of Kensuke Aida and Inhis? Will the Prime Minister grant a pardon? Does Shinji Kari even really want to pilot the Ava? If there's another pilot that doesn't want to pilot, but there are so few Avas, should that be considered treason against humanity? What about the Trident program? It's purely Japanese-owned technology. Inhis owns the machine and the JSSDF holds the lease. Doesn't that violate the Valentine's Day Treaty that prohibits the UN from engaging in all sorts of belligerence against nations? It was about the balance of power. Perhaps the army should have one as well. What's the price tag again? What, for something that doesn't really have the ability to reliably kill the angels? Perhaps it was time to take a look again at the Marduk report. Make one massive nationwide testing for compatibility with the Ava. There has to be more pilots in case Shinji Kari goes into a month-long coma again. Are actual laws against fraternization between the pilots? A pregnancy will set a pilot away from combat for months. Should NERV simply issue condoms or make steps to prohibit that entirely? Why are they attacking only Tokyo 3? On and on and on. Shinji said nothing. He simply let the questions roll over him. The sub-commander of NERV, the generals, the ministers and their learned colleague, the reporters, all shouting, all decorum put aside. The world was watching. Then suddenly, Mana stood up and wordlessly walked over to the podium. She gently pushed in front of Shinji to face the committee. She zipped open the front of her long coat, stuck her hand in and fiddled at something. Mana then took her right hand out to pull at her left. Everyone stopped shouting.
I've heard all I can take. If you don't intend to help, then leave!
She slammed her prosthetic arm down again, snarling out her words.
If you don't value how we saved your lives, then just die!
Mana, Shinji whispered behind her. She stood there, her frame small and lithe, so much like a doll, all dressed up. Her hat remained on her head, the skull there as if laughing at all of them.
All that he suffered just to get this far. All the suffering we endured.
She slammed her arm again and again down at the wooden panels of the podium, cracking it in wild parody of their calls to order.
My friends died for this. It doesn't matter back then if we would win or not. We children, you call us, but knew what we had to do.
These thoughts boiled while she listened. She was a soldier, not a poster model. Did they really think she was voiceless? Meaningless? They stood by as it happened, and only when it was all done they were grabbing at the responsibility. She couldn't just sit by while that happened.
The worth of power is in how it can protect. You can't even do that. I will not listen to any of your useless words and your worthless promises that only stand in the way of those who actually can. How dare you try and steal the honour of their sacrifice?
Kirishima!
Shouted the defence minister.
Consider your words well, or you may find yourself held under contempt.
What more can you do to me? I belong to the United Nations, not to you. I belong to the fight of humanity, not to your politics.
She pointed out with the blunt end of her prosthetic arm.
There's the law and there's justice. I can't see it here with all your talking. While people fight and die, what do you really accomplish?
Mana threw that arm away, into the crowd. Over her shoulder, without looking, the artificial arm arced up and came down. People fled from it, like it was a poisonous snake. It lay in an open circle in the crowd, with chairs turned over just to get away. It was still twitching a bit, the fingers opening and closing slowly. Her shoulders shook. She put her remaining arm down to steady herself. Her left sleeve flopped useless and empty. A pitiful sight. Her apparent vulnerability only seemed to make her stronger though. Those watching her were born to a culture that seemed to love seeing their hero suffer. The greater the trials, the greater the honour.
I can't let you do that. You won't waste how we already suffered to get this far. We won't give up.
She grit her teeth and looked up, her teary eyes on the big screen. It wasn't endearing. Back in Tokyo 3, they were cheering. "That's our Kirishima!" shouted the Marines stuck back at the house. The silence of those two empty rooms strained everyone, but they hadn't relocated. They elected to remember the sacrifice. "She seems like such a gothic lolly," said Sergeant de Leon, leaning back and grinning. "But then you look at her eyes. Children should not have eyes like that. I can't say I'm proud of what it took to get this far. But as a soldier, I'm proud to say I've lived long enough to serve with these children." "Those fools are afraid a well-honed fighting force would swoop out of Tokyo 3 like some kind of conquering crusade. Well, I can't say the idea doesn't frighten me a little bit, but we're going to stick with the 1st Prefectural Defence Forces anyway, aren't we?" replied Corporal Shinichi Ota, looking troubled. They watched the generals on the screen looking shell-shocked. Outright defiance. They had the choice of supporting that or not. There were only slightly less limitations on their movement from NERV. To save the city and the world, it was inevitable they'd have to move out without waiting for permission someday. It was a whole new way of war. "Hakon's first and only, the Kirishima Corps," added Sergeant de Leon. He chuckled. "Morons won't even know what hit them." She tipped her hat down, trying to hide her decidedly unprofessional tears. She was sure they were thinking, "We have to rely on this weepy little girl?" She was a soldier, damn it. She felt a hand on her shoulder.
"I won't let them steal from your strength anymore,"
she whispered, barely coherent.
"I won't let these faithless scum."
"It's all right, Mana."
It won't happen again. I won't fail."
She looked up sharply and glared at them. Some were afraid, some held pity, but not one of them thought they could possibly be in the wrong. They had the wisdom of their age and experience. They'd suffered through some hard times too. Shinji looked around. They didn't know him. They're only several hundred kilometers distant from Tokyo 3. They might as well be a world away. Their world was safe and prosperous, and loathed having to fear that all their good work since Second Impact could be destroyed so easily. These were not a people he could win through mere eloquence. They required concrete reasons to trust. "By the way, sirs, you never did answer Miss Haraki's question," he asked quietly. "Just what is it that you're all afraid of?" Their faces were aflame with indignation. However, before they could answer, the ground shook in a more severe earthquake. The air itself seemed to ring. Shinji pulled Mana to himself as they fell to the ground. The lights flickered but stayed on. The podium had fallen. Shinji Ikari slowly got back up to his feet and put one foot on the wooden board. The lights flickered again. He bared his teeth. The old bureaucrats and feeble learned men were only just then pushing off the floor to try and salvage their dignity. Me. You fear me. Your minds have yet to catch up with that knowledge in your soul. It wasn't as if his presence was eroding their authority, but rather that as long as he remained in Tokyo free, people could see coercion by threat or indoctrination. He lit up the little ways of how they were expected to behave. Carrots were coercive as sticks, but he had one really big stick. That was why he was so soft-spoken. There's something under NERV that the angels want. Something that could cause third impact if they get it. That's why they're so persistent. That's why we have no choice but to fight with everything we have. He looked at Kozo Futsuki, and their thoughts were the same. Does he know? And it doesn't matter now. There's a reason angels hate us being here, and there's the reason why we have the right to live. We don't need any more enemies. You do not want us to put you alongside our enemies. It was hard to really get angry at their antics, considering he could survive his own ICBM aimed at his own location. The silence afterwards would be so sweet. He had to update those countermeasures against himself. The uncertainty principle inherent in far-seeing meant his greatest fear, like his father, was in losing control of himself. You have many doubts, Shinji said aloud. Well, there's one thing you shouldn't need to question. He helped Mana up and narrowed his eyes. His glare was without fear or pity. We will win! Mere moments later, the doors flung open, and the camo fatigues-clad military poured into the room. The defence minister got up and shouted, "What is the meaning of this?" One of the officers went to the front and saluted. "Sir, special orders from the Prime Minister. We are mobilising everything. NERV and the JSSDF should report immediately to their primary duties. No delay, no interruptions." He kept his finger free of the trigger, but the threat was clear. "Why?" The old man blinked owlishly behind his square-rimmed glasses. Futsuki butted in with, "Are we under attack?" "No, sir. Further information will be provided when you return Shinji Ikari to NERV, sir." Everyone looked uncertain. Was it an angel attack? Was it a coup? The questions from the press were ignored. For the sake of worldwide security, the flow of information to Japanese mass media had to be temporarily suspended. Panic kills. That was a fact. Futsuki's phone rang. It was Gendo himself with news. Shinji had grit his teeth so firmly his gums were bleeding. Mana could feel his anger. His eyes were wide, in shock and hatred, and his gaze was distant. He was shaking. "Shinji?"
"It's taunting me,"
he whispered numbly.
"I can feel it. I don't know if I can hate back with the same intensity that it has for us."
Back at Tokyo Free, Principio Eternus was roaring and flailing in its restraints. The sky above the city was a pale red. The two other Evangelions were at the surface, maintaining the strongest AT field they could muster. 4 hexagonal glows marked strikes that should have at least flattened several city blocks. One appeared above Kyoto 2. Tokyo 2 was not so lucky. While they talked and argued over matters of rights and policy, Sahakriel had appeared without warning. It spun, releasing globs of itself that crossed all the way across the world before arching down. These burst into pellets each a metre in size, raining upon Berlin 2, Washington 2, various places in the areas of Siberia that were still frozen wasteland, and Rome. With most tuned into the live broadcast, and knowing that it was Tokyo 3 that was a weirdness magnet, there was practically no chance to even react. No time to hide, no time to pray. The inquiry continued, totally ignorant of this. Atmospheric jamming hindered the flow of critical information. It began to take out satellites around it, almost playfully, with its appendages whipping around while the holes in its body regenerated. It then personally wiped Beijing 2 and NERV China off the face of the Earth. The crater was 100 kilometres wide. The shockwave heard all the way across the world. All major cities had to be evacuated. Sahakriel was systematically bombarding places with the highest human population density. 12 pods, 12 locations, always several mass-driven strikes aimed at Tokyo 3, every 2 hours. It did so while slowly moving towards NERV America, in what used to be called Area 51. The opposite side of the world from Tokyo 3, well away from Shinji Ikari. The siege of heavens over earth had begun.